Morning. I'd like to call this July 11th, 2023 workshop meeting to order. Kimberly, are we in compliance with freedom of information?
We are.
Mr. Orlando, are there any changes to the agenda?
No, sir.
Seeing there's no changes, do we have a motion to accept the agenda? Okay. All those in favor, raise your right hand. Thank you very much. We have one item on our workshop agenda today, and that is the discussion for the Hilton Head Island Major Thoroughfare Corridor Plan. This is our second Town Council workshop on the Major Thoroughfare Corridors Plan. This workshop was in March 2023, and we reviewed and discussed the systems. This is the second workshop, and we will review and discuss segments. I would like to invite Sean and his team to present. I'd also like to acknowledge that we are joined by consultants Brian Kinselman with MKSK, Addie Weber of Tool Design, and Jonathan Guy with Kimberly Horn, and Tony Rowell from MKSK.
Mayor, thank you. Mayor, Council, Town Manager, for allowing our team to meet with you today to continue discussion on the corridor, major corridor plan. We've been working at this for about 18 months. I've got some opening comments. This is a big undertaking, so I just give me just a little bit of grace and a couple minutes to go through this. We've been working with an expert team. Our internal team was with staff experts, but also our consulting folks here that are at the table, and their teams that have been building this plan and doing a lot of the background work. Brian Kinselman representing MKSK. We know Brian, we've seen him from some other works, but MKSK is a planning, urban design, and landscape architecture firm. They're based out of Columbus. They've got 12 metropolitan studios. They're a leader in capturing the full value of streets for all users. And we know in their work with us, helping develop a corridors plan in the Stony community earlier with our engagement. Addie Weber, we have Addie Weber from Tool Design. They're founded with a mission to support innovative streets and dynamic communities where people of all ages and abilities can enjoy walking, biking, and access to transit. Tool has been hired to prepare and update the federal AASHTO standards, and I have what AASHTO means. American Association of State Highway and Transportation Officials. We know that they're engaged on the national level and are leaders in that field related to biking, walking, access to transit, and so forth. Jonathan Guy we have here representing Kimberly Horn, a planning and design engineering consultant. They're nationally recognized as industry leader, creating sustainable transportation plans for communities and regions. Other team members have played a critical role. We have Tony Roll, support for MKSK. He's really been our point person. Last minute changes, even as close as maybe 9:30 this morning. But we really appreciate Tony and their team that have been part of this, including Jonathan Staker. We've got Jared Draper with Tool Design. We have Carla Vincent on our team, and our project managers and engineering, transportation, stormwater, and facilities that have all provided subject input and subject matter to get the project to where we are today. At your March workshop, we reviewed the system segments, the essential elements that make up safe, functional, attractive corridor, including landscape, signage, intersections, etc. At today's workshop, we'll review the segments, applying those systems that we looked at earlier in March. The specific areas that Town Council had advised us to review in more detail, and those segments include William Hilton Parkway at Northridge, William Hilton Parkway through the Chaplin community. It is we call it William Hilton Parkway Segment 2, but really the Main Street corridor and segment, the Palmetto Bay, Bay Pines, Arrow Road segment, as you look on the south end, Sea Pine Circle, Hope Avenue, and Coligny Circle in those segments. So we've really reviewed those in more detail. They're going to be a major focus of the presentation and discussion here today. We'll review the details for these segments as well as general recommendations for the overall corridor. I want to just point out, this is a massive undertaking. This is something that this community has not done at this level. And I want you to know that we appreciate council's support in advancing us and giving us the resources and ability to do this work and to make meaningful impact to the community from a safety, from an aesthetic, from a functionality for all users within these corridors. Council will ultimately be asked to adopt the plan and the concepts that are part of that plan. We want to have discussion with council like we did on the systems today with some segments. I anticipate follow-up meetings to go in more detail, to get us to the point where we can ultimately present you a corridor plan that you're comfortable with and that we can use as our blueprint to work with setting CIP and budgeting, work with our partners. Only 3% of the roads on Hilton Head are owned by the town. Most are private, but we also have to think about our partnerships and relationship with DOT and Beaufort County when we talk about these segments. So we know we'll bring you a plan sometime later, but when you're comfortable and we've addressed all your questions, the input, and bring that back. Individual segments will be presented from council from time to time as we advance through implementation. You control prioritization through your strategic action plan, through the budget and the CIP that's presented to you each year. And we can have discussions during the quarterly CIP meetings that we will plan to execute. Council will need to prioritize segments for implementation based on factors like pedestrian safety, accident occurrence. We have some heat maps that show where incidents occur, where there's been crashes, incidents, injuries, and fatalities, and then major points of congestion. We'll look at what are designs of safe pedestrian crossings. How does this integrate into the Stony plan that was drafted earlier and presented to council with a position? But the goal today is to get your input on these segments that we're presenting and later return for follow-up as many times as needed with council to make sure you're comfortable, to ultimately ask for your approval of the major thoroughfares corridor plan by adoption through resolution. And that will provide us the blueprint that allows us to execute what I've talked about through CIP, through talking with the county, through the state. How do we, and based on those conversations, what is our final disposition on road ownership and other things? So I look forward to an engaging workshop. I know I've talked too long because there's a lot of slides in this presentation, but again, it's a massive undertaking and we're ready to advance through the presentation unless I give the town manager an option if he wants to make any other comments. But Brian, I'm going to turn it over to you and reserve the right to jump in and add along the way.
Good morning, Mr. Mayor, Council, Mr. Manager, Brian Kinzelman, Senior Principal at MKSK. Thanks again for having me. You've met my esteemed colleagues here, and as Sean had said, they're best-in-class practitioners for sure. One thing I want to dwell upon on this opening slide, and that is town staff. Sean touched upon it. The town staff has been absolutely extraordinary on this project. Carla and Eric and Sean and Mark and Brian and Jennifer and Taylor, all of them have put countless hours into this and isn't just for sake of putting their fingerprints on it, but adding value to this. So I appreciate their input. So if there's cause for credit, don't forget them. It isn't just this consultant team. Again, as Sean had suggested, we want to reintroduce this project. It's been so long ago since we introduced it the first time, and there's been a lot of water under the bridge, as they say. We did brief you on some of the systems early on. We want to reiterate that very briefly today, but we want to concentrate on the segments, which is the application of those systems to geographic locales within the system as a whole, and then discuss the implementation priorities. We've put those forth in draft fashion based on our sensibilities, but those demand your input as we move to final. And last but not least, the purpose of this meeting, as Sean suggested, is to give you a primer, I call it the trailer to the movie. The movie itself will be in the printed document that will be forthcoming to you all. This is very complex, intertwined information. It's urban planning, it's transportation, it's land use planning, it's economics, it's public health, safety, and welfare, all rolled into one. So I apologize in advance for the length of this, but we're trying to condense that into a very brief undertaking. We look forward to your comments. We've got our sensibilities and our recommendations. We're looking for your input today and moving forward. And then we'll be back in front of you to address those and apply for adoption. We've begun this with analysis of the existing conditions. That's kind of a aha moment, right? Of course we would. You know, we've analyzed crash data. We've looked at critical areas in the corridors that need improvement, targeted safety of the roadways, bicyclists, and pedestrians. We have started and ended all of this looking through the lens of safety. Serious injury and even fatalities that happen within our public domain, and we need developed standards for infrastructure, materials, and aesthetics, and that is not to bake in monotony. It is actually meant to, from a technical standpoint, have a common understanding of state-of-the-art infrastructure and materials and geometries so that we can express the individuality of areas across the corridor over time. This is a lot of public right-of-way and linear feet of trail and street. So I'll describe this in general terms as we get into this and understand exactly the confines of it. Again, we spoke to systems before. That's the technical aspects of what we apply to the corridors itself. Landscape and aesthetics, signage, branding, public art, roadways, intersections. Those are both cross intersections, slip lanes, and also roundabouts. Pathways for both pedestrians and bicyclists. And then transit. That transit will help us in a number of issues that we face as an island. Then to the segments, again, applying those systems to those segments. There are 8 different segments or reaches of the parkway itself. We've broken it down into geographic areas based largely on the feel of the corridors, the geometry of the corridors, the adjacent land use, the neighborhoods that are adjacent. The South Island region, there are 4 segments there as well. That includes Palmetto Bay, Sea Pine Circle, and Pope Avenue, and portions of Forest Beaches. And then the Cross Island region. And then lastly, the implementation. To Sean's point, this is a very complex issue that leads to capital improvements. How do we take that down over time? What are the priorities? Where's the funding come from? How do we craft that in a capital improvement budget? All 3 of these sections, they're not chapters, they're sections, lead to this comprehensive document. Again, as Sean had mentioned, we've got these wonderful, bright, world-class practitioners assisting us here. We've looked at the plans that you've done before. We've looked at national standards. We've looked at Smart Growth America and Vision Zero as guidance as well. We don't have the corner market on all the good ideas. There's a lot of good ideas out there, and we're taking advantage of them as possible. So we're learning from what others have done and what we've done on this island in the past. As I mentioned, this is a lot of roadway and a lot of folks using it on a daily basis. We know there's a lot of people that inflow into our community on a daily basis, and less than half of that outflow. We've got 72 miles of public pathways. We've been at the forefront of a trail system nationally in years past. We need to augment that and get back to that point of. And then the trolley, not to be discounted. We've done a lot with our trolley system, and our transit system does a lot of public good for not much resources and organization. They've done tremendous work. We think that's a diamond in the rough that can help in a lot of issues. So, as I said before, we've started with safety. This is crash data. It's a heat map mostly at intersections and at mid-block crossings that indicate where we've had bicycle, pedestrian, automobile conflicts, where we've had fatalities, God forbid, and where we've had major accidents. So those have really driven where we think the priorities lie in immediate. We've talked with a number of
Brian,
stakeholders.
could you go back to that slide if you don't mind?
Certainly.
I just want to point out, we talk about only having 3% of roads owned by the town. If you look at the safety slide here where crashes, incidents are happening, they're really not on town-owned roads. So the ability to have a treatment that's safer and influence what DOT and the county allow is going to be critical in making improvements. We need to change if we're going to improve these statistics, and that's what this plan aims to provide us, the information needed to push those changes. Thank you, Brian.
Stakeholder involvement, the plan developments, neighborhood representatives, transit, public safety, utility folks, retail, and the major landowners have all been consulted and asked for their feelings and opinions. Quite frankly, they align with our intuition as we've approached this. We need to increase safety. We need to update the pathway system, fill in the blanks as it were, and improve the standards, functionality of intersections, create a consistent aesthetic that is not a monotonous aesthetic, that is a consistent quality of aesthetic that may be expressed differently, segment to segment, place to place. Develop a uniform signage and wayfinding system. There may be too many signs, there may be not enough signs, but signage as a whole needs to be looked at comprehensively. Calm traffic and reduce speeds. Posted speed is one thing, actual speed is something else, as our law enforcement may tell us. And reduce the vehicle traffic demand, i.e. the transit system, i.e. bicyclists and pedestrians. How can we take automobiles off the streets and put it into So a highlight of the systems that you have seen before. Again, it's landscape, roadway, intersections, signage, transit, and pathways. That was probably too quick for you all, but we have in the compendium document, you'll see a lot of detail to all of that, again, where we're establishing minimum standards, directives as to what goes where, to be used as future design takes place into engineering and into capital improvements.
And Brian, if I can point out, we delivered council a presentation that had a little bit more detail to remind them of the system discussions that we had in March. For the purpose of this meeting, trying to advance into the segments and then recommendations, we condensed that down. So the presentation that you had previously provides more context on this.
Happy to answer anybody's detailed questions about any of that today or latter parts. Don't mean to skate over that.
Okay, if we have questions as we go along, or how do you want to?
Yeah, I think since it's so intensive that asking some of the questions as we get those certain highlights is appropriate.
Mostly a comment or coming out a question, and that is at the March 3 presentation, we had a document of about 113 pages, which included this part that you're summarizing now, systems. And now we have a document about 220 pages. My understanding that we are to consider all of that together, totaling about 333 pages of presentation. So we don't set aside what you showed us before on systems. Remember that to the extent that we can.
Yeah, that's correct. We captured input on the systems back in March, and we have not lost track of that information. Now moving into the segments, we'd like to hear your thoughts, have discussion, any direction. We'll have some options that we're going to ask you to evaluate and comment on if you're comfortable today. But ultimately, we'll bring the whole plan back for adoption once it's ready.
Each individual segment will make sense when brought together as a full document. So I appreciate your comments on the system.
Brian, question. Ron touched on this a moment ago. You are presenting options that may be implementable depending on SCDOT, or these are suggestions that SCDOT would adopt. Do you understand my question?
I do. a couple things. I'm gonna let Jay Guy jump in here. We're making recommendations of options based on expertise, things that we've seen elsewhere. We've certainly had conversations with SCDOT about those options. All of that needs to then move into ultimately as a capital improvement project into preliminary engineering, where there's a lot more conversation with DOT and county, and then into final design and documentation and bid build. You all understand that. So it has been vetted. I won't say it's been approved by DOT, but it's been vetted and conversed with them. So Jay Guy, please add to that if you can.
Sure, all of the options are feasible options with SCDOT. They fit the RDM, the roadway design manual, and they are either implemented elsewhere in the state or in adjacent states that SCDOT looks to for direction guidance as a partner state.
So we aren't establishing a negotiating document with SCDOT. We're saying that these things can be implemented as you suggested.
Correct.
I think that's right.
Would acquisition by the town of ownership of these roads be a possible and perhaps last resort in the event of non-cooperation?
Sure, it gives you the power to control the roadways. Again, that comes with additional cost and expense to the town, but you're the ultimate authority if you own the road.
We're looking to DOT as a partner, not as an adversary. Hilton Head and the other place in South Carolina. Point well taken. Now to the segments. Again, these are the geographic reaches or breakdown of the larger geography, which is what I think is the backbone of our roadway skeleton. William Hilton Parkway, it has segment 1 is from Spanish Wells to Jarvis Park. Segment 2 is Wilborn to Beach City Road, including Main Street. 3 is Beach City Road to Dillon, essentially. 4 is through the Mid-Island, Dillon Road to Folly Field. 5 is Matthews, Folly Field down to Shelter Cove Lane. 6, the straightaway as I call it, the Shelter Cove Lane down to King Neptune. The second straightaway is King Neptune down to Shipyard and to Wexford. And then it's into the Wexford Drive to Sea Pine Circle. So we've broken that down into these geographic areas just largely to understand it. Each of the conditions within each of these geographies can vary for sure.
Right, right.
If I could, list these 1 through 6 or 7 here. Is that the priority you're giving them, or is that just
No, sir.
geographic north to south? It's not a priority at all.
That's right. Councilman, that's right. It's a way of taking something large and breaking it down in incremental pieces so we can understand it intimately. A couple of those are in fact priority areas, just based on that previously shown heat map of the accidents and the fatalities. We need to address those safety issues as a first priority.
Thank you.
One other comment, can you go back to that previous slide where you're showing the segments, 8 seconds? I think it'd be helpful, and just a quick suggestion, to put numbers by those sections on the map. It helps to locate them when you're looking at them. I did it myself.
Yes, ma'am. Duly noted. Thank you. South Island is Palmetto Bay from Helmsman or the base of the Cross Island Bridge down to Sea Pine Circle. It also includes Arrow Road, Archer, Target, the support roadway system to Palmetto Bay. Sea Pine Circle itself and the roadway system about it, relief valves, Pope Avenue to Coligny Circle.
This also includes Lagoon as well.
Yep, Lagoon Road, section of Lagoon to Everset. And then North and South Forest beaches for a certain extent as those stretches influence and are affected by Coligny Circle. Then the Cross Island Parkway. As we know, the toll booths have recently come down, repaved, and modestly renovated corridor has been put in place. I think it looks marvelous. It performs very well. We need some bicycle and pedestrian access So that is from the base of the bridge out to the 278, the Parkway. It also includes the Fraser Bridge itself and the approaches. As we know, there's some folks who use that bridge for pedestrian and bicycle activity. So the prioritization of that, again, safety, connectivity. We've got to make sure that all modes of traffic can get to all places through this backbone, which leads to the skeleton of the public domain of the island. And then placemaking. Not all corridors are the same. Not all parts of the island are the same. We're always giving deference to the natural environment of the island, not just to protect it, but in fact, in many places to restore it and to enhance it, because it has been damaged and it is under stress, like any other natural environment that receives heat. So the safety, go to those high crash areas and deal with them. New controls and configurations at intersections to make them safer. Access management, which means reducing those left turn motions out onto arterials. Turn lane improvements, improvements of unsignalized mid-block crossings, pedestrian crossings, and reduction of those conflict points. Connectivity is fill the gaps in the pathway. As wonderful as our pathway system is, it doesn't connect every place to every place. So we do need to fill in the blanks, as it were. We need to create new neighborhood connections, not just to the planned developments, but to the neighborhoods that are part of town, town jurisdiction. Connections to neighborhoods that are separated by roadways. How do we make those crossings safe so I can get from one side of my neighborhood to the other side of my neighborhood through safe means, and reduce those pathway conflicts. Placemaking, again, is always to improve the island character. Hilton Head Island is a very, very special place, culturally, historically, environmentally. How do we improve and advance that? Signature corridors within a street network may want to be a very special place. Let's create a special place through some of our standards. Significant aesthetic and character improvements. Where we can satisfy a safety measure and also do it in an aesthetically pleasing way. Those two are not mutually exclusive. It just takes a little bit more brain damage from time to time when we're into. And then median recommendations to enhance the aesthetic. How do we reduce the desire for increased traffic speeds with a more robust medians, not only to slow down traffic, but to increase them. So the prioritization, Councilman Stanford, to your point, we have prioritized the Parkway into 3 significant segments that need some improvements as a priority in our opinions. Palmetto Bay Road and Arrow, Sea Pine Circle, to be sure, and then Pope Avenue. Especially this time of year, as you know, Pope Avenue is a very corridor.
Sorry, can we go back to that slide and stop there for a moment for questions? So this is prioritization that the team has developed, and it might be helpful to revisit this after the council looks at all these segment improvements, because I have a few notes and questions about that prioritization, but I think it might be more helpful to talk about those as we go through.
Yes, ma'am. This is all first blush, our recommendations, sans your input. We look forward to having your input again today.
And Brian, if you don't mind, I'm going to jump in for a second. The term priority segments here is probably not accurate. These are segments that council asked us to study in detail, and to make sure that we brought these forward for discussion. It's up to town council ultimately to tell us what the priority segments are. But we've evaluated these in detail and have recommendations that we'll cover here shortly. Some are recommendations that are sort of a single treatment application of the systems, and then some have options that we would ask for some input on. But yeah, I want to make that clarification. These are first areas asked to really take a deep dive into, and that's what we've done.
Sean, do you have any idea if you take these segments for a period of time, invest in them to make those improvements, what time period that might be?
I don't know, I'm not positive. I don't know how much all of it would cost, let alone the competing projects and priorities that I know that if we pick a few, and there's some at the end of this that we know we can advance in the shorter term, I think we can make a difference.
I think it's important for the council and also the public to understand expectations and commitment for this kind of a project.
Yeah, I think once we get input on these segments, and then the plan will be able to, before adoption, have more detail in the implementation and how long that might take to implement these key.
I think it's also important to understand what the timeframe is with DOT for approval process and everything else, so we can determine that timeframe, because that's going to be a driver as well, I'm certain. Yes, sir.
While we're on the topic, we've had this discussion before at plan and earlier this year in this type of workshop setting. I think there was somewhat of a consensus among council that WHP segment 3, I think, which is the Northridge area, is absolutely a priority because of the level of fatalities that have happened in that area. So I guess I'm suggesting that as we move forward in this process, because it is very comprehensive, there's a lot of moving pieces here. Of course, we've got to adhere to other schedules like SCDOT and that sort of thing, that we call that section out moving forward as the priority, okay? So that we know we are committed to getting that done before someone else gets killed. I'm making that suggestion to all of council, and maybe we could give staff that directive.
I would agree with Alex on that point, but I would also like to raise, consider, given the fact that some of these projects may take years, find some interim solutions to deal with the most convenient problems that we have, not just rely solely on what's going to be done in 2, 3, or 4 years.
I would agree with that. Kimmy, go ahead.
I just wanted to interject in terms of something that is talked about before in other areas. That part of this conversation that I'd like to have is information on the costs to acquire the roads in our town. I think it's important for Hilton Head to own our roads, as many of them as we can, so that we can create an environment that benefits our community. So part of that discussion, I'd like to understand the costs and the related issues are to doing that, because obviously it's the discussion already taking place. It's integral to what we can do, how long it takes, and the benefit, the ultimate benefit that comes from it. So
I can see the benefit of the town acquiring these roadways from that point of view, but my big concern here is that we're not only taking on ownership, but we're taking on maintenance.
Right.
And that's going to be an enormous expense.
Right.
And I'm not prepared to accept that at this point.
but I'd like to know what those costs are before I can make that conclusion.
Mark, I think it's all been said. I just want to really make sure we hit the point. I think Sean said it well already, but you ask about prioritization. Mr. Brown brings up a great point that we've been asked to look at, that William Hilton Parkway Segment 3. We've married that priority with your thoughts, with the community thoughts, as well as the accident data you saw on the heat map. But the prioritization is really built around your commitment and funding, right? And so ultimately the work product of what we're working on here does two things. It builds a project list and it gives us direction on policy, right? Policy being own a road or not own a road, 45 miles an hour or less, striping patterns, all of those are policy decisions, but ultimately you build that project list. And that project list, once we have it, we go try to fund it, right? Through grants, through 1 cent sales tax, which could be next year, through our own capital project funds, and so on and so forth. So really what we're doing is high level, trying to build a project list, getting some direction on policy. And I do suggest that if we're considering ownership of roads, we talk with DOT about it and see if we can accomplish what we're trying to accomplish with it in their network. But if we can't, then I bring those problems to you with some proposed solutions on a priority by priority basis.
If I could, I want to second what Mr. Brown is saying. We talked about that particular section at our January workshop. I think I was even so bold in March to say, if there can be an interim solution at North Fork, and if it's planting in the median, I'll haul those plants out to the middle of the. So when you come to that segment, if there is an interim solution, which is easily doable, please tell us that.
So I just want to make a general statement. While this is a 50,000-foot overview, it's not into the minutia. It's not about the prioritization. Understanding that we've got some areas that are high priorities, and we know that. I would suggest that as we move forward and we provide our notes to Mark into MKSK, that we identify those things there. It is a very long presentation. We want to make certain that we continually move through this and we get to where we need to be, so we understand and the public understands what is being looked at holistically throughout that corridor.
Can I just add one thing about prioritization before we jump away from that slide? We did do a ranking system of all of the improvements made. And in the larger document, you'll have that in there as a reference. And these are the segments that had the most benefit with the implementations. So that is how these 6 or so were developed. Not my personal.
So travel speeds being one of those safety issues. We're making recommendations, as you see, your eyes in the lower right, of some proposed speed limit changes. Parkway now is consistently and largely 45 miles an hour. We think there are segments of that can and should be slowed down, especially through the straightaways, as I call them, in an effort just to give people a little bit more time to respond to happening around them. I'm going to let Jonathan Guy speak to some of and Addie to speak to some of the detail of this, but this is segment 2, which we're proposing in no particular order for this, the idea of proposed pathways, intersections. All of the signalized intersections need to have 4-corner pedestrian crossings.
Including Pembroke as well.
Including Pembroke. Apologies for the second square from the left of not being color-coded. It too needs to have box. Right turn traffic calming so that we can, automobiles and people complete the pathway along the south side of the parkway for bicyclists and pedestrians. Eliminate the mid-block crossing at Central Avenue, causing those pedestrians then to move to crosswalked and signalized intersections for safer crossing. Main Street is part and parcel of this. And design happening on the park, on this Main Street portion itself, public and private. We'll through some segments there. Again, we've broken this down into incremental pieces and show cross sections of what that would look like. Providing intentional pathways on both sides of the street, pedestrian buffer between the vehicular way, putting bike lanes on the street itself. We've got a video we're about to show you that expresses this in 3 dimensions. So I personally don't read sections well, but 3-dimensional images I do. This in many cases requires some easement to be taken outside of the right-of-way. Next segment going to Whooping Crane is a wider concrete sidewalk and lives again partially within and bicyclists largely on the street, or dare I say the commercial area of Main Street. So more sidewalk, more multi-use of the sidewalk is important. Moving to the south of Whooping Crane, another section showing the modest median planted, 2 lanes of traffic in one direction, bicyclists, and again, sidewalk. Circle itself, we're recommending we place a circle at Wilborn and Main Street. That is a disjointed intersection, as many of us know that go through that, but that continuous movement that a roundabout would provide us is going to help a lot with that efficiency. Solve some of the offset geometry of the roadway system, which is a conflict point right now.
Brian, I don't understand the recommendation of 8-foot pathway and at the same time a recommendation of 12-foot pathway. What's being recommended?
Joan, can you address that?
So in where the 12-foot is recommended, that's in the slightly denser adjacent commercial district. So the thought is that would provide a little more flexibility for on sidewalk events or things to happen in there. And then essentially it's an 8-foot clear pathway. And in this case, we have trees and plantings that happen on a regular spacing that interrupt that 12-foot zone.
Put separate spaces along the road, it'll be different widths.
Yep.
All right, thank you.
In comparison, the existing fairly new sidewalk along Hope Avenue, what's the width of that? Down by Low Country Celebration Park.
Hope Avenue?
It's between 10 and 12 feet. I'm not sure exactly which one you're talking about, but it's wider, 10 or 12 feet.
Right in front of Low Country Celebration on.
Yeah, it's probably closer to 12 feet in that section.
And
It's a wide.
across the street on, in front of the Marriott, I think that might be.
On the other side. Yeah, that helps, the visual of that where we have existing. We have a lot of different widths on our pathways. Okay.
And we have a great visual that's coming up. We have a little video about, and you can notice, so in when we started this segment 2, when we are looking at William Hilton Parkway and those intersections, that's application of the systems to those areas. So we're not recommending options. Just like here, there's a recommendation for the roundabout at Wilborn and Main Street. And so we'll walk through the segment. We'll show you a video. And then there will be some areas when we talk about that segment 3 where we do have those options. So if you see anything in segment 2 that you have a question about, we'd like to know, because there's just the recommended treatment without objection, or comments that will come subsequent to this meeting, we would advance those as acceptable, moving ahead. Alex.
So where it says talking points, those are not for us to talk about and choose. It's telling us what you think we ought to do.
I think these kind of talking points are what we're doing right now, getting your input and your.
Okay. Apologize, Mayor. You went through that really quickly. I'm glad we're not spending a lot of time on individual bubbles. So. But where you're talking about specific improvements within targeted areas that you've already identified, I think it'd be helpful to explain them a little bit more to us.
If you're talking about, the roundabout, I think that'll be explained
that.
through the video.
I got that part. What I'm talking about is, for instance, the overall plan, and mine doesn't have page numbers that I could read, but there's talking point 1, talking point 2, talking point 3 in WHP 2. So those are a lot of key intersections in that area that you've identified as a priority area. So bottom line is, what are we doing there and how does that improve safety?
Yeah, I think as they walk through each one of those slides, talking point 1, intersection safety, they talked about having the 4 corners, that consistent treatment with crosswalks. Talking point 2 about pathways and crossings, to have that consistent treatment, to add the segment, the missing segments of pathways that exist in that segment, and then mid-block crossings, talk about removing mid-block crossings, and we'll talk about some other spots where a different treatment for signalized mid-block crossings might be appropriate. So I think that was what we're trying to cover at a high level, to say, here's what are the recommendations within that segment at this high level.
So the four corner treatment, where it's all the same, that goes back to the systems of what it looked like. So I got that. But where you're taking out or adding mid-block crossings, I think it's important to point those out in each of these segments. So where is so looking at WHP 2, where is the mid-block crossing being
Councilwoman,
eliminated?
it's on the slide here. That's the
Three.
mid-block crossing at
Thank you.
Central Avenue.
At Central Avenue?
Just make a comment and maybe a suggestion. This is the first time we're seeing this and able to hear the explanation of what it is we're seeing. Mayor, you made a suggestion about our notes that we submit
Right.
back. I think it's important for us to listen carefully, take it all in, but there's obviously homework to do, to combine the two reports, to come up with more points. Right now, they're gut reactions. And I think to be more specific and helpful along the line for our next meeting, we take what we gather today, do our homework, and send notes, have another meeting, so that it can be far more specific as to each one of the elements. And I don't know if that makes sense to anyone,
No,
but
it makes,
that's what I plan to do.
that makes complete sense. And this is a major document undertaking that requires not only a lot of conversation amongst ourselves and the community, but with our other partners, with the PUDs, to make certain that it's meeting the needs. And there's a lot of understanding that still needs to take place. So definitely we need to take our notes and submit them. Alex, I know you had a comment.
That's okay. I'm making a note and I will send it in.
And we'll make sure we go through these segments with a
I think some of the reasoning behind some of these suggestions or recommendations would be helpful as to the thought process as we're trying to understand the conceptual plan.
Councilwoman, we'll slow down a little bit.
Yeah, I appreciate trying to get through everything, but it's like, okay, what was that?
We can take all day as far as I'm concerned, but
Brian, let me ask a question, or Sean. We're dealing at a fairly conceptual level at this point. Aren't we going to be dealing with more detailed plans later on where this discussion would be addressed? Just wondering how much detailed information we need today as opposed to the next iteration of the plan.
Today is application of the systems to these key areas within the segments. It's at a high level. What we're recommending here, for example, on the slide, elimination of mid-block crossing to provide consistent treatments at the other intersections, to add pathway segments where they're missing, consistent with what we've identified had a previous discussion on with the pathways, application of the certain type of crosswalk and striping pattern. And so we can go slow to make sure you understand the benefits of what we're recommending.
If I might, we're going to be coming back with this broken down into smaller segments so that we can spend the time understanding and asking the more detailed questions to determine how we move forward. And I would assume that is going to be based upon the prioritization that we give within the different segments. So this is just to say, this is what's being considered for us to do our homework, and then we'll come back and take a look at those broken down to smaller groups.
lots more detail, lots more engineering.
Right, and I'm going to reiterate that, because right now, we've tried to clarify that, and I know it's a lot of information, but where do we start, right? We could have brought you Main Street by itself. We could have brought you Polk by itself. We could have brought you William Hilton Parkway 3-3 by itself. But would we have been asked, what's the big picture? So what we're trying to do is get through big picture, but I appreciate what Ms. Bryson's asking, because I'm trying to keep up too. Let's just pause for a second, talk about those talking points, but know, yeah, we're here to hear your reaction right now. But at the end of the day, we're making a recommendation here, at least on this one, talking point 3, that mid-block crossing at that intersection is extremely dangerous. I cringe, a lot of us cringe when we drive through. Our hard recommendation today is, yeah, we don't believe it belongs there. And if we're going to cross the street, there's other elements in this presentation that will show us how to cross the street safer. And so, yeah, let's just pause at the talking point, but again, we're gonna come back to town council as an example with William Hilton Parkway -2 as a street section before we spend much more time, money, energy, or encroachment permit on this type of work. Hope that helps.
Thanks, that'll be helpful. I did submit about at least a 14-point comment yesterday, so I've already done that. Today's trying to understand some of the graphics about what you're trying to show us in these itty bitty graphics. Thanks.
I forward all of those comments.
Thank you, Brian.
Back on to Main Street, again, we should have put the video maybe first and then the sections second. It's more understandable
Yeah, please.
when you fly through.
Volume up a little.
Your microphone closer, Ron?
Sorry. Most people don't want to hear my voice that loud, but glad to accommodate. Again, medians have been planted. We've allowed for more pedestrian and bicycle areas, converting this intersection into a roundabout, again, to increase that traffic efficiency and resolve what has been pretty troublesome offset geometry. I know staff has struggled with this intersection for years from a traffic movement standpoint. So this roundabout satisfies a lot of issues, that roadway geometry and minimizing those conflict points. So these are applying the streetscape standards, various intersections, crosswalks, and queuing spaces on the walkways leading to those crosswalks. So the same standards we're using elsewhere are being applied here. Whooping crane, traffic circle, providing for pedestrian crossing at the 4 legs. Same with this roundabout at Hospital Center. Tony, or Kim, I'll ask you to maybe get up that video if you would, please. Just 4.5 minutes long, but it's
Traveling westbound toward Wilburn.
Volume. Is there supposed to be volume?
there is no volume.
Okay.
There's
No,
no.
no elevator music. Mhm. It is intentionally sped up for the nature of the viewing.
Sure it
but-
is, Tony. Sure it is. So there's the proposed condition laid over the existing roadway. 11-foot travel lanes, bike lanes on the street, 5-foot wide bike lanes, and buffer, landscape buffer, and then pass.
I hear music. Thank you. I thought it was just me.
I think that's someone's cell phone that's adding music. So, Councilor Stanford, you can see here where we've got that widened pathway, but we've got the planters that are curbside. Those again, as final design happens, those may be increased or diminished, but gives you a sense of the pedestrian environment. No medians in this section.
Does this require acquisition of more right of way?
In some places, it'll require acquisition of at least easements, taking the median in some of these instances and putting them into the pedestrian environment causes us to push out. This is at Whooping Crane Circle.
In some places, you'll see we've pushed in, so the median has gotten diminished or removed in places to accommodate sidewalks on the outside, so that we are impacting those adjacent properties less by sacrificing some of that median space.
I'm hoping those trees are, though we haven't worked from a survey, haven't worked on this to that degree, those trees can be identified and we can adjust as need be to save significant trees. Could be any number of things. And that planter may be something that's elongated. That could even be a tree lawn, not just a planter.
Would agree with that, David. Also, one of my gut reactions is I'm uncomfortable with bicycles on the road. We have so many people, we encourage more to travel by bicycle. And we know that it's not a single person on a bicycle. It's often groups of people on bicycles carrying a train of connectors behind them with their dogs and family. And it for me, feels, honestly, gut reaction is against me agita. It makes me feel uncomfortable about the dangers and the hazards.
Patty, is that recommendation primarily given because of the speed that you would be also recommending on that road?
Not sure of the speed of the 25 miles per hour through there.
But
So that is a recommendation. I mean, a big comfortable bike lane, I think, is always, you also have to look at the right of way. I hear your concerns of group riders, and that's what the guidelines from ASHTO are coming out with. More people like to social ride, and so it's a bigger space that people.
It's not just the rider who's bypass people, like our bike clubs, et cetera, might do, but it's those group riders, the families and the rest, and it's just, for me, it doesn't feel right, and it worries me, and I would request to support.
I think as I understand it, from looking at a lot of bike lanes in a lot of different locations, is that there's kind of cyclists, if you will, those who would be on the pathways that are recreational cyclists, and those who are probably going in a bike lane because they're traveling from work to another place, to and from home or to and from work, and I have seen a lot of people try to ride their bike along this road, including me, to get from one place to another. So I think, as best I understand it, widening the sidewalks to 12 feet can accommodate those recreational kind of cyclists, the sometimes cyclists, and adding the bike lane adds that availability for those who are commuting for work or something else like that. Or if I want to go get my nails done,
that was our last stop on the video there.
I hear you and understand that. Well, it's just there's not going to be any, that would be a discretion, right, as to where you choose to ride your bike. I'll stand by what I said.
Video is very helpful to see. Segments coming alive helps a lot.
I agree. Thank you.
All those comments are duly noted.
Yes, Alex.
I appreciate the video as well. When we come back again, I would be interested in the treatments on William Hilton Parkway as well, particularly with the new circle at Wellborn and Bus Drive. There's a good amount of stacking that happens on William Hilton Parkway certain times of the day in that area. I'm assuming that will probably increase with the circle being there. So I'm just interested in how that looks.
The other thing to ask about, and maybe it's in one of the slides, and I apologize for not catching it before, but that is coming from Hilton Head Plantation to 278, there's a disconnect there on a bike path. So how does one get over to the 278 bike path from Main Street? And that would be done. But now you have to go through the parking lot and through the woods.
I don't know if it shows on this.
Yep, that shows the interconnected bike lanes that would connect between Parkway.
Sorry, what,
So it's
kind of hard to see. Let me see if I
probably hard to see this, the.
Ms.
the
Price,
red.
let me ask you specifically, are you trying to connect the Whooping Crane roundabout area to William Hilton Parkway? If you zoom in, you will see great connection across, and Sean, that's the one thing we talked about, is zoom in perhaps when we come back. You will be able to connect off that roundabout to the pathway system that's in place. That pathway goes right across the road. You don't really quite see it. You gotta be careful through there, but it does connect to William Hilton Parkway. There is an interconnective. So when we come back, we'll zoom in quite heavily on that.
Yeah, I know where that is. What I'm trying to say is when you come along the golf course to leave HHP and you get to the traffic circle, then you have to cross over Main Street, go through the shopping center and through the woods to get to 270. So that's what I'm asking is, have you addressed that somewhere?
Yes, it's addressed. You would come across out of Hilton Head Plantation. You come down across the roundabout at a connection off the roundabout, a little further back from the main circle. I don't know if we have a zoom in on that, Sean, but
We did have a slide here, that was added for this presentation today that, has the Hooping Crane circle that shows the connections into the existing pathway segment. It's a little forward when we get into Main Street plan. And then the red dotted lines to show the connections into Hilton Land Plantation. It's this slide.
Overall plan?
Oh, I'm with you, Sean.
Slide right here.
Okay, thank you. I'll study it. Thank you.
that was very important to us, showing that connection out of William, which was part of the impetus for acquiring Main Street from that bike ped mobility standpoint.
I'm going to let my colleague Jonathan Guy speak to Parkway 3. There's a fair amount of crash incidents that have happened in this segment from Matthews on the right of this image to Beach City on the left. Mid-Island District.
Can you move your microphone closer, please?
In the Mid-Island District. In the Mid-Island District Plan, we spoke to this vehicular connection through now privately held properties to interconnect some of these roadway systems, the heavy black line. So that may look familiar to some of you. These are some of the accidents at the intersections of Matthews and also Beach City. And we're proposing that we fix some of those right turn motions to calm some traffic, pedestrian crossings at each of those corners at the Beach City intersection. Eliminate the left turn, some of the left turn accident prone areas. Jonathan, I'm going to leave this to you to expand upon if you can.
Sure, absolutely. As was brought up earlier, this is one of the worst corridors from a safety standpoint. Commissioner Brown brought that up. And this has the highest concentration of fatalities as well, as you can see up there on red. One of the things that was brought up previously about eliminating the right turning treatments is something that SCDOT is doing throughout their entire state. Unfortunately, we have a very bad history of accidents and fatalities on our streets. Probably the worst in the United States is where we sit right now. Just here on 278 in SC 42, they just completed a project where they removed a free-flowing right turn or a partial yield movement onto 278. The reason for that was safety, pedestrians, cars. There have been numerous studies that have been funded by insurance companies about documenting the viability and the need for these movements because they create a lot of congestion, a lot of safety concerns, and they are a bad treatment when you are blending pedestrians and bicycles with motor vehicles because drivers don't pay attention when they're turning right. And so that is one of the biggest safety things we can do at this location or this section of the corridor is to remove those. Traffic will still flow. It'll be safer. And so that would be one of the first things we would want to recommend with this to come through here. Another thing is looking at this section through here, especially at Southwood Park, there is a a lot of driveway openings through here and median openings. There's some confusing configurations of left turn lanes. We want to formalize that, make it more understandable. You've got to remember, all of you live here and you drive this and you know what that's like, but you also have a lot of folks who come here once a year and they don't remember those things and they don't remember how to. So our goal with this was to create uniformity that fit with SCDOT standards that provided a safe movement. So closing this is going to help to address some of the safety concerns and issues that we have at that location. And then providing additional connectivity, right? We don't want to just close it and you don't have a way out. So making sure there's connectivity between parcels, between intersections is going to be important to move those left turns to a safer location with greater control. And you can also see there at Southwood Park to provide access to the new signalized intersection. That's going to be key. It's going to pull those drivers over to help with that. And then parallel connectivity. I can't stress this enough. This is always important when we're looking at improvements on a much larger corridor. You have to remember, while this is still while this is designated US 278 business, it still carries a US shield. So DOT looks at it through that mindset that they are moving vehicles, pedestrians, bicyclists under their complete streets policy, but it's also about moving larger vehicles through here too. It's not truck restricted. So we want to make sure we have parallel connectivity that takes trips off of that doesn't have to interact as well as pedestrians and bicyclists through there. This is one of the worst intersections. You can see the dots up there. This does have the fatality there at Palmetto Parkway. We want to make sure we are improving the pedestrian and bicycle and vehicular safety at this intersection. There's a nice big cluster there. This is the area that was the brightest white when you looked at that heat diagram at the very first, or bright yellow, meaning this had the highest concentration. So we want to address that as we move through here. We've got a couple different options, okay? So we're going to walk through these and we're looking for feedback on this relative to what we're talking about. So this is at the intersection of Palmetto Parkway intersection. The first option would be to install a signalized intersection in conjunction with, as you can read, new roadway connectivity on both the north and south sides of William Hilton Parkway. I will tell you, from my almost 27 years worth of traffic engineering, for a pedestrian or a bicyclist crossing a multi-lane facility, the safest place to do that is at a signalized controlled intersection, because you don't have to think. And again, I'll go back to, you got a lot of people who live here and understand how traffic works. You have a lot of visitors who are here. They're trying to enjoy themselves. They're not paying attention. Taking away decision-making is a good thing in that sense, to help them cross the street safely. Another option is just to completely close this. Close the intersection there at Palmetto Parkway, provide a planted median, take out the pedestrian crosswalk through there. Uncontrolled crossings, I don't care how much signage you put up or how many flashing lights you do put up on a multi-lane facility, it will get lost. There's a lot of things that will happen from a driver's visual perspective. Closing that, the statistics will show you that anytime you can reduce the number of conflict points, which would mean closing an intersection, putting in a median, the safer it's going to be. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we get through this. Or there's just two options on this one.
So if I could break my own rule for a second.
Sure.
and offer an option 3. Close the current entrance into Southwood Park. Move it down to entry lane next to the Oaks. And therefore you could have an intersection there that would probably be safer, because you're eliminating one right past Gardner Drive. And then if you had a lighted intersection there, it would create a very safe, much safer crosswalk.
Ed, Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
I appreciate we've looked at an option to put a back road in on the Northridge side. I'm just curious to know if there's been any consideration of doing Oaks and Southwood side, kind of behind that business center back to
Gardner Drive.
Thank you,
Gardner.
Yeah.
Yep.
Did talk about that, yes. I don't think we have a graphic that shows that, but that is called out here. Let me get back to the right slide. It is called out there on here with connectivity on the north and south sides. So that would be something that would be important. Again, making those connections so that you can take out, the left turn movements there.
one of the things that I noted in counting the dots where accidents, fatalities, and so forth happen, something like 4 out of 15 dots are between intersections. People who were injured were crossing in the middle of the block or jaywalking. Is there anything that can be done about that?
Sure, I will tell you, yes, there is things that can be done to address that, and it's through channelization, providing the correct locations, providing the crosswalks and locations that make sense, and then that will cut down on individuals jaywalking. Note that the crashes that are reported, sometimes they do fall outside of the fringe of that because they'll just code in a GPS location for that. So there is a little bit of variability of where those do fall. So some of those that may have fallen or shown outside the intersection just because of how the data is coded with Department of Safety, it may actually be close to the intersection, closer than what is shown just based off the GPS coordinates. So there's some variability with that as well.
Jonathan,
Yes, sir.
this area has been talked about on council for years. I remember several years ago, there was a statement made, can't reduce the speed in this area because it creates a problem with speeds in other areas. The changes in speeds is a bad thing. Is that fair to say?
One of our recommendations actually is to look at the speed limit through here. I don't think that it necessarily is a bad thing when you consider how your roadway network interacts, right? So essentially you have a giant loop that circulates in and around. And with the toll road being declassified and now you have that connection, so you're not pushing as much traffic. I know that still primarily favors this section when you look at the counts. You have that alternative route through that. I wouldn't see a reason, especially for this section, that I would hesitate from reducing the speed limit.
Yeah, I think that in my mind, that's conceptually consistent with differentiating this area from other areas on the island.
Sure.
And so from a safety standpoint, it stands to reason that by reducing that speed, we have enhanced the safety of pedestrians who are going to try to cross either at an intersection or mid-block. I think that's helpful. But if I understood you correctly, the only safe way to get pedestrians across that street is with a light.
That truly is the safest way because it's controlled versus giving decision-making authority to individuals who may or may not be able to judge distances for arrival times of cars quickly or can't see well in the evening. Unfortunately, have to wear glasses now too. So, that is a factor associated with that versus something controlling it. I will add one thing relative to the speed limit as well. I think that's important. While I wouldn't oppose a change in the speed limit through here, a reduction in that, what we find though is that the design also needs to change, right? This road was designed at a certain speed in that natural harmonic rhythm.
That's completely consistent with what I'm thinking about because this entire area has to be different than other areas on the island to solve the problem. So differentiating the cross-section, the speeds, lighting, all that stuff comes into play.
It would also help with the section coming around towards Shelter Cove, which is kind of a speedway, because you don't have a lot of breaks in traffic through that too. Much like how we do with traffic signals where we platoon traffic and we keep that in nice manageable bunches. If we get the speed and have conformity through here, that will help carry through that section. And while you will see, depending on the changes you make there, you will see maybe a potential increase there. The increase will be less than what the posted speed limit is today. So you're going to help reduce that overall potential for crashes.
I think we should be reminded that we spent a good deal of time and energy trying to think about the Mid-Island District Plan, the village idea.
Correct.
This is an extension of the village, and so how we treat this segment of the road shouldn't be an SCDOT highway.
Correct.
And just to build on that, I want to talk a little bit about the role that you see this street playing, and I think that goes along with the speeds. I think when you talk about some of these treatments we have, it's really looking at predictability and legibility, where the car driver is going to be, how they're going to move through spaces, particularly in this area where there's high crash volumes that are happening through here. Creating that legibility and consistency and really thinking about the role of the street and the parallel connections can really support what you envision for this.
Question about the closing, the crossing there. That would consist of some sort of barrier and certainly no roadway. But would the barrier be enough to divert pedestrians as well?
It can, depending on how you design it. That's most
Doesn't sound like
likely.
it'd be very pretty, but
Well, no, actually, this will be a landscape median, so depending on how nice you make the landscaping in there, yes. If it doesn't look like I can cross through there, that's going to deter pedestrians. If it looks like, just a little bit of grass, you're going to have people who are just going to sprint across that street because it's path of least resistance.
looks like a traffic light's the better way, but we'll see.
Councilman, as you'll see in the, I think maybe the next slide, the barrier or the strip between vehicle travel and the trail is meant to be robustly planted for a whole number of reasons, not the least of which is environment, but certainly to diminish the desire to cross. Also, those medians are to be robustly planted as well. Now, somebody that wants to hop over a 4-foot tall shrub mass and go between trees, if they want to crosswalk, they want to jaywalk bad enough, they probably will. But the casual bicyclist or the pedestrian that wants to stray off and dart across the street, we can fix that with that streetscape without putting up guardrail and concrete barriers and things that we don't want to see.
Had so many pedestrian accidents there, that's what I'm thinking about.
But Councilman Ames is exactly right. This is the Mid-Island District, and this will have a special character, and this is intentionally where people I think, we want them to slow down and take advantage of what is village center type development. Also, this conversation to Councilman Ames' comments has been going on for quite some time, but we're just months away from having a smart signal technology through this corridor that is going to help with vehicle movement efficiency as well. So that wasn't in the conversation 10 years ago.
So let me understand. I understand that the signal would be at Palmetto Parkway, and that's where there's a convenience store on the corner, which is where a lot of people are crossing to get from Norfolk. So you've observed where pedestrians are crossing nowadays. So what I think I'm hearing is that the recommendation in this area right here is to add the traffic signal at Palmetto Parkway, to take out those left turns, and to replace all that concrete with landscape medians, which if someone wants to cross mid-block, that can be a pedestrian refuge in the landscape median block, but it can also be a refuge to stop halfway. So would it be all three of those things: traffic signal, removal of those left turns, and landscaping those medians through the section? Am I understanding that correct? Oh, and lower speed, of course.
And north-south connectivity too on either side.
Okay.
Too. So that helps to move traffic to key locations.
Maybe that's 5 points. Okay.
5 key points.
It's such a good point to make. I will jump in. It's a series of solutions. We didn't even talk about some low-level lighting. That's part of the island is very, very, very dark. And I think that I'm not advocating for street lights to brighten that area up, but I think there are some low-level lighting treatments as well as lit crosswalks. And I think people cross now, in my opinion, I drive through there a lot at night and avoid it a lot of times for that reason. People cross wherever because they don't feel any safer in the crosswalk. And the goal is to make them feel safer and be safer in the crosswalk. And then to Brian's great point, provide some streetscape elements that prevent you from just crossing anywhere. So I think that all the things we're saying are a series of improvements that we would have to get encroachment permits from DOT and whatnot to implement.
So that leads me back to the question of where I asked before, what's our interim solution that we can do right away? Because, getting a traffic signal there and going through the warrant process with SCDOT time. So what can we do right away as quickly as possible to address safety in that area?
There's some key things that can be done. SCDOT is testing right now in Greer in pavement lighting for crosswalks that's actuated as you cross a barrier so that you don't push a button. Because again, pedestrians and bicyclists can be lazy as far as what they want to do. They take the path of least resistance. That trial period should be coming up pretty soon. And that's an application that for the existing crossing that's out there today, back to town manager's comment relative to they don't feel safe at the current crossing. That would be one of the things that could easily be done. It's pretty low level cost. It runs off of solar, so you're not having to have a power hook up there. And that would allow to, especially in the evening when pedestrians and bicyclists can be the most vulnerable crossing the street, especially in low lighting scenarios, you're going to bring some attention. It's going to do something different than what you're going to have with a normal sign. If you go put signs up out there at night, you may or may not see those. But if you have a lit crosswalk, in addition to in pavement lighting, potential overhead lighting that would only activate when there was a pedestrian there. Those type things can be done relatively easy and through a simple encroachment that doesn't require additional right of way. That's a low cost solution to start with.
Councilwoman, we could also go out there immediately and plant those buffer areas. We could plant those medians and we could, I don't know if this is a word, densify that planting from intersection to intersection to discourage those jaywalkers.
I like that better than some experimental thing SCDOT is looking at in Greer's, with all due respect.
One may be quicker than the other, but
Yeah,
probably both of them are solutions.
From my very low level of expertise in the area, it seems like if you can cut out those left turns and block off all those concrete left turns and create some pedestrian refuges right now. It's Patsy going out there with her Jersey barriers that she drags in her plants.
So
I mean,
Brian,
I'm trying to find something like that.
Jonathan, if y'all could look into some options there and provide back to us in the next couple of weeks so that we can start exploring that, that would be very helpful.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So let's jump down here to Northridge Drive. So just moving closer to the intersection there with Matthews. This is an area that has some very confusing traffic patterns, overlapping left turn lanes. There's parallel lefts through there. It's confusing for drivers. We do have a fatality at this intersection where Northridge comes into WHP. So our recommendations go through a series of options through here, not completely eliminating the left turning movements into Sea Turtle Marketplace or to Northridge Plaza, but restricting the lefts out. Lefts out are always going to be your more dangerous movements on a intersection in a multi-lane facility because you are having to look at multiple directions and try to understand what 3 different user types are doing actually for when you consider the opposite side as well. And so eliminating that, putting in what's known as an R-cut, that's just a technical term for it, but would allow for pedestrians to cross in the middle of that intersection. This could be signalized so that you're controlling that intersection, allowing those lefts to stop. Working with your integrated signal system that you're implementing, the beauty behind this is that you can actually program this so that you can synchronize movements completely separate from each other. So if you're headed outbound off the island, it doesn't necessarily have to stop traffic because if the left turn is not needed on the Northridge, you don't need to call it, but you can call the left into Sea Turtle Marketplace. So it gives you a whole lot more optimization features than a normal signalized intersection. Plus it allows pedestrians to cross. There would be a median in the middle that they would use. And again, we're crossing at a signalized location. The other option is to just eliminate, not have the crossing at this location completely removed. Remove that, still put in the infrastructure associated with the R-cut, reduce access, again, access management, consolidation of driveways, making the drivers go to key locations where pedestrians and bicyclists are going to expect them is going to be key for this. And then option 3, just completely take this out, work with additional connectivity to go back over to Gardner on the south side for connectivity over there. You've got connectivity with Northridge. This would be a heavily landscaped island at this location. This would also work in concert with the intersection there at Palmetto Parkway. If we were to signalize that, you'd still have your access. You'd still have connectivity and mobility, but you would reduce the congestion here and the accidents that are crashes, that are currently occurring at this location.
So option 3 would reduce the most accidents. Did I just hear you say that?
Oh, yeah.
The other thing to say is that if you're riding your bike along the pathway on the Northridge side of that road, there's so many ways for traffic to come at you. I don't like to bike along there, I can just tell you that. So that would also reduce the number of possible volume of turning traffic, the direction of turning traffic along that multi-use pathway on that side of 278.
Correct.
If we get into the weeds on this, we're gonna need to see some animations. It's hard to visualize your images here.
Absolutely.
And we also need to understand what the effects are to the businesses in the area.
Absolutely.
But on this one, I do want to say that option 3, for me, holds an awful lot. It takes our parkway and makes it start to look like a parkway throughout. And anecdotally, I can tell you that my observations are that people cross wherever they want to cross. Never mind that, they ride down the center of the median area on their bicycles, often at night, which is incredibly dangerous, but they do that. The parkway as well. So I like option 3.
Joel, Jonathan, I'm not proposing this, but I just wanted an answer. Is a alternative another light there?
Spacing wise, you'd have to look at how that would work with, you couldn't put a signal at Northridge and Palmetto together, too closely spaced at that point. It's kind of an either or sort of situation at that location, because you've got the signalized intersection in Matthews, which is a heavily traveled intersection. It's got a lot of traffic, a lot of movements there. You don't want to put in another major multi-phase signal. Could it be considered? Sure, it could be considered.
Let me step through a composite image that maybe visually shows in 3 dimensions what some of these improvements speak of. Again, this is looking towards the off island, Northridge on the right, and Sea Pines or Sea Turtle on the left. This suggests we have 12-foot wide pathways on both sides. Suggests, as we just talked about, expanding those buffer strips and adding some density to them. Enhance the plantings in the median for the very same reason. Also, it tends to calm traffic when there's only 2 lanes of traffic in one's view shed. Provide some crossing enhancements to Councilwoman's points about the bicycle crossings at curb cuts. The less of those we have, the better. The better they are marked when they have to happen, the better. Again, applying our systems to those crossings. So taken as a whole, that becomes much more parkway-like, much more green, lots of separation as much as we can provide between modes of travel, and where we do have to have crossings, we do that in a safe fashion. So again, this is a concept.
SCDOT have 150-foot right-of-way or 200-foot right-of-way?
Do you recall, Jonathan, off the...
In other words, are we going to have to expand the current right-of-way to accommodate what you're proposing?
Yes, we've got some of this we're suggesting. It varies. I think the short answer is it varies. And is this going to need to be applied lockstep in every segment down the parkway? Likely not. But as it gets into preliminary engineering, will we be in some places being into easement conditions outside of the right-of-way? Likely. Is it going to be our goal to stay within the right-of-way? Certainly.
And in a lot of these places today, a lot of these pathways are also already in easements. So it's kind of continuing the existing tradition of that.
But we certainly want this to be the safest condition possible. And if that's taken a few more feet in an easement, that I think is a worthy undertaking.
The other item that popped into my head when you just said the parkway, I think I'm making I know I'm making a distinction between what's going through here and parkway.
Yeah, and to your earlier point, this being the mid-island section and that which is likely, hopefully going to redevelop in a more mixed-use fashion, this is the dare I say, becomes the downtown district for the island over time. And I think this roadway character needs to change and reflect that. What jumped into my mind, Councilman, when you mentioned signalizing the Northridge intersection, we've got that certain separation between signals that we're all aware of. One could argue, may not be me, but one could argue having more stoppage, a more civilized streetscape through this town village concept wouldn't be a bad thing. As long as automobiles can move safely and efficiently and pedestrians and bicyclists can cross, so be it. We want to take the expressway out of it, turn it into a parkway. And this section of parkway, I think, wants to be distinctly the center of our island parkway. We also have folks, we got neighborhoods on either side of this. To one of the earlier points, we got moms and dads and kids that need to get to convenience stores to pick up a half gallon of milk or sustenance. And we've got to make sure that if we close off those crossings, that it is intuitive where those crossings are, so those folks can get from one side to the other for their daily needs, not just for the convenience of bicyclists like me. This is so folks' livelihood.
Brian, just to build on that point, eliminating access, there's going to be other things that we're going to need to look at, the other signalized intersections, that pressure that comes on there. And again, back to the role of the street of doing the local trips and the regional trips, and how do you begin to kind of pull that apart?
It also begs the question is, if you add additional signalized intersections, what it does to the Cross Island and Palmetto Bay Road, because it's going to then divert traffic from 278 to Business 278.
That's right. Yep, there's a
Later discussion.
Unless there's more.
So now on to Parkway segment 5, which is through the Chaplin neighborhood and park area. I'm going to let Jonathan speak to some of these. I'm going to let him speak to all of these, quite frankly. Starting at Matthews Matthews Drive.
hypotenuse around connecting Matthews to William Hilton as we come around. This is, I referred to this earlier as the beginning of the speedway. This is one of those locations where we start to see traffic speeds pick up as you come around from the mid-island part of it, because you don't have a lot of friction. Friction meaning intersections, driveways, other things like that. People feel like they can drive at a higher speed. That's exactly what they do as they approach the Shelter Cove area. And so if you are a visitor who's coming in, here and you're connecting up to William Hilton to head into other locations, key crossings are going to be important. I won't belabor this point again, but the free-flowing movement from Matthews onto William Hilton, again, major safety concern. This area was highlighted. This is the next worst intersection as far as concentration of crashes on the island. So anything we can do to improve that, not only from a vehicular standpoint, but also from a pedestrian standpoint, is going to be implement right
Before you
turning.
move off of that,
Yes, sir.
I'm just curious. I'm going to just date myself here a little bit. That intersection, Matthews Drive on the 278, once upon a time, a yield sign where traffic quite often would come to a stop before entering 278. I guess my question is, I'm not opposed to your suggestion, but what's changed as far as SCDOT's appetite to go back to that break versus what they recommended before, which was to have it free flowing?
I think a couple of things have changed. The volume has increased to a point where there's more conflict between vehicles because you've got a higher density of vehicles now that are on 278 from when that was implemented at one point in time. And so that conflict between vehicles coming off Matthews to have an acceptable gap to merge into, that's decreased. And because that's decreased, you can't easily maneuver into that. There's places where this still would work, not necessarily on the island, because I don't think it's within the right context of it, but elsewhere in the state, these would still work. Here, you need to be focused on reducing that conflict and standardizing the design so that you don't have free-flowing movements. Again, it's sending a mixed message for drivers. This tells me, okay, I'm entering into a roadway where I need to get up to speed quickly, because I'm going to merge into this because it looks like an acceleration lane versus what we're just talking about of trying to reduce speeds to make it safer for vehicles. So it's communicating the wrong message to a driver just subconsciously by the design. But that's DOT's and zero tolerance for crashes as they move forward with that, trying to improve the safety, trying to reduce our insurance rates here in the state. That's what they're trying to get rid of, and these are number one for that. No, great question. Look at locations where, again, we mentioned this throughout, but Matthews Drive, implementing that. Accident-prone intersections, what can we do at those locations to offset crashes that are there? Singleton Beach Road is another location with crashes. Provide pedestrian crossings at each corner of the intersections. That's going to be key. Anytime we can standardize that, so it's not just a single crossing where we've got it on all four corners, that's going to be important as we continue to move forward relative to safety. Work with our property owners to consolidate driveways. There's a couple places through here, we've highlighted several of those where it's a lot of just open cuts. And from a driver's perspective, but also from a pedestrian's perspective, and on a bicycle, you don't know where a car is going to come out. So channelizing that, standardizing that, making it look more uniform, anything you can do along that, it's going to reduce your conflict points, it's going to make it safer, and then put in locations where you need to control those movements, improving the aesthetics through the medians. That's going to help with reduction of movements there as well. And then an updated roadway section. We talked about this previously in the previous section, the Mid-Island section, but really establishing this as a gateway is going to be key for this, having that vision. This is a section where I feel like it does not have the character that it needs to for a corridor that's called a parkway. Right, that's a pretty simple explanation. And so that's going to help not only with making bicyclists and your pedestrians feel more safe, because they are going to have the perspective that it's dealing with 2 lanes instead of 5 lanes through there. Speeds are going to change through there because it's going to feel like it's tighter for the drivers. It's going to feel much more luxurious for the pedestrians and bicyclists because it's going to feel like it's a smaller, more intimate setting than I'm out here on a highway. And those things are going to translate down and affect behavior of those drivers through here. So those are some key things that we need to be looking at. This is my section.
The existing section here, as everyone knows, this is one of the tightest portions on the island as we're going through the parkway. And so we've tried to be as judicious as possible with implementing the standards here while balancing those restrictions. So what's proposed here is adding a median where there's a center turn lane today as we try to restrict those turning movements. And we've also included a narrower buffer between the pathways and the roadway. So this section here is working to balance the goals of slowing traffic, providing safe pedestrian zones with the limited right-of-way space here. So that there is still work to do with coordinating with property owners to make this happen, but we feel like this is a good balance to achieve that.
One of the hot buttons that I've got in that section is that your pathways are immediately adjacent to the right-of-way. And so providing this buffering would be a big safety enhancement.
Yeah, Councilman, they're right behind the curb. They're almost unusable. They're so, dare I say, scary. So to Tony's point, we've got a viable neighborhood on the left side of this image and a park on the right side. And to add a planted median, add a planted buffer in what those folks will be looking at from their front door and from their front yard, I think is important consideration as well. We have to provide them access out to the parkway. That's their only way. If we can consolidate curb cuts for their safety, not just for the safety of those on the parkway, that would be great. And also to create a more green in their front yard, not looking at 4 lanes of traffic uninterrupted.
Tony, I'd like to add a sidebar because your cross-section treats vegetation pretty much the way it does everywhere. Just recalling, all that land was farmland when I first moved to the island. It's the one place on the island you see blue sky everywhere. And so I think there's another opportunity to just differentiate this area in some way so the type of planting that's added to the corridor may be different than in other areas.
The intersection at Matthews, Folly Field and 278, from a cyclist and pedestrian point of view, those turns are very difficult to manage. So you have to look at traffic from all different angles. I think we've had a number of bicycle accidents at that intersection on the Folly Field side. So what does this do for that particular intersection, especially where it looks like you're introducing U-turns? May or may not help, but what about an all-stop signal so that there could be a crossing for pedestrians and bicyclists? And what do you do about right turn on red and an all-stop signal?
So an all-stop signal or from a pedestrian standpoint, or a scramble phase is what they're called, there's no movement for the vehicles. The right turn on red, so you can have right turn prohibitions, and you can allow right turns when the scramble phase is not in place. So you'll have different types of signage that will come on to restrict that, much like some of the preemption signs you'll see at a railroad crossing that'll stop for movements. Removing that and removing that free flowing left or right that's coming off Matthews there. And standardizing that intersection gives us a couple different things. Providing the 4-leg crossings on each leg of the intersection, implementing the median through there. Again, we're narrowing down the section through there. We're making it easier to cross. If a pedestrian does get halfway across and get stuck, the median is wide enough for them to pause and rest. Where you don't have that, you don't have a crosswalk on the north side right now. Looking at the turning movements of the intersection, you've got some sweeping right turns, and I'm not talking about where we have the free-flowing movements. I'm talking about some pretty wide radiuses through there. Standardizing that, bringing that in, making the intersection more accommodating for the pedestrians. That's going to all improve safety. Again, anything that you can do to, the best way to say it is to balance the perspective and the ownership of the roadway between vehicles, pedestrians, and bicycles, so that the pedestrians and bicycles feel like they are supposed to be there. And that's pretty easily done with just geometry changes in design language, right? That's going to make a huge difference. That's what we're recommending at that intersection specifically. And then I guess in addition to that would be signal enhancements as you need for the intersection.
That sound good with Tool? I think y'all are the experts in the bicycle and pedestrian.
Absolutely. I think it's getting back to that predictability of where modes should be, where they're operating at that time, taking away, tightening that up so pedestrians can get across. If they can't, there's a place of refuge for that. I think those are all key design challenges or design opportunities that can be implemented.
Alex?
Chaplin was at its safest before the Cross Island Parkway was built, because tended to see backups in that area as people were traveling, particularly in the peak hours of the day, which slower the traffic, the safer the situation. So I'm glad to know that we're changing the narrative, so to speak, as to it not being just a thoroughfare anymore. When we're having the discussion around closing curb cuts and approaching property owners about sort of this shared access, let's be mindful that number one, the town owns a lot of property in this area, and certain parcels that are up for sale at the moment. I think that needs to be closely looked at, and let's be somewhat creative with that, so that we're not devaluing folks' current property and future opportunities, right? So,
let's talk about a couple key locations that we want to jump into for recommendations. We started talking up there at Matthews already. Let's jump into some other options and other locations here. Let's talk about Burke's Beach intersection here. Like with all of these, it's about improving the pedestrian and vehicular safety at the intersection. This was a location that did have some crash history So we want to make sure we address that. What are we talking about relative to that? Well, one option here is to signalize the intersection. Again, you'll go back to what I said earlier, for pedestrians as well as for even for vehicles from the standpoint of controlling what drivers are going to do. A traffic signal is going to do that. You still have conflict points with the signal, but that's going to help with that. Designing the intersection so that with the implementation of the median, it has the provision for what I'll say passenger car U-turning movements. I'm talking about tractor trailers or WB67s, but if a resident came out of their driveway, they would have the ability to come down and U-turn at a signal, which could be controlled by the signal, so it makes it safer for them to do that. Also works in coordination with pedestrian crossings. Another option at this location would be to not put in a signal and convert this to an arc cut, right? That's going to take out your exiting lefts. You've got the opportunity because of connectivity to go down to Rose mid-block crossing near Bradley Beach Road. We can look at options with this. This just takes out the movements that would need to be there that are unsafe. This could also be signalized at some point in the future if the left turning movements got so heavy that they couldn't find a gap to control that as well. So it gives you two different perspectives. And then lastly, this would be just keep it as an unsignalized intersection. Look at improving connectivity, removing the unsignalized crossing. Want to make sure we have a safe crossing for pedestrians for often at signalized intersections. I'll pause there just for a second to process that, and we can answer any questions.
Sort of hard to get your head wrapped around it. My gut kind of leans toward a signal, okay? But I would ask that practitioners is the word that Mr. Kinzelman used, really take a look at this holistically, understanding that it is a mixed use area, okay? There are businesses and residents in this area, and of course, a community park across the street. What makes the most sense for the individual property owners that are in this area as they're trying to avoid conflicts and that sort of thing? And I'm not an expert. Again, it's just gut reaction. I know that it is very unsafe, okay? The whole idea of having breaks in traffic movement is important for folks to access their homes and businesses. So I guess where I'm going is I'm really leaning on you guys on this one to offer up, what makes the most sense for this area, as it is very unique. You don't normally see, this amount of traffic going through an area that operates as home sites as well as businesses. And, oh, by the way, there's a park, right?
Just to add to that, the idea of the park enhancements that may be coming, amount of traffic and the safety issues, crosswalk existing there is just a problem. And so the removal of that crosswalk probably smart, as well as I like option 3 again. Without going to all the details, I'll send notes. But I like option 3 again. It removes the crosswalks, takes people out of danger. It creates a situation where there's an easy and safe left-hand opportunity for that U-turn. So going up and down that area multiple times a day and knowing how the traffic moves, the idea of planting it to slow down the traffic, all of the things that you mentioned, I don't disagree with any one of those. I don't see a traffic signal there. I would prefer for one not to be there. But of all the options, then at least fully look at option 3. You're on an environment that respects the residential and the community as well as the businesses that
When we come back and discuss this in more detail, all the options are predicated upon having consolidated drives with some property owners. So I think we need to understand if that's not an option, what else might make sense.
Let's talk about, yeah, pathways. Pathways across. I can do it.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, sure. So looking at locations, this was, again, again, if no pedestrian crossings are provided here, provide a mid-block crossing down at Bradley Beach to access the Drisden Beach Park and Bradley Beach. So as we work through this, kind of getting back to what the mayor was saying, a lot of things are going to adjust as you get into the feasibility of this and you implement, you get into the details, right? So how the driveways are connected, where are the access locations, where are the pathways, what's the offset of that, where does it make the most sense? We know that there needs to be some sort of crosswalk through here as we design this and get into the details, then that will come out and continue to move process.
I think just to build on that, and apologies for, is just thinking again holistically, like when we close that, where does that push other folks crossing, and does that negatively impact those crossings and how that movement works through in those spaces? That is something to consider when thinking about it holistically. Route modifying.
Understanding that, and I don't know whether or not there has been crossings in that area, but it would be interesting to know what that looks like, because anecdotally, again, there's not a lot of activity.
Mayor, may I just make a quick point? We all see that big old clock ticking on the wall. It's a matter of how long you're willing to participate. We still have Palmetto Bay Road.
Yes.
What else?
And Pope
Sean,
Avenue,
what else? Pope.
Sea Pine Circle.
Pope and Sea Pines Circle.
They'll have about 3 elements and then some next steps. Are we trying to get out of here by 12, 12:30, or 1?
I'm canceling my haircut right now for 12:30.
I'm here to work, Mark, so whatever it is, it's fine with me.
Okay, well, let's try to get out of here by 1:45. I don't want to hurry you, but if we don't get to everything, we know we're coming back. So this is great feedback today.
I just know I could use a quick personal break.
I was just, yeah, as was just whispered in my ear, right now might be a good time for a 5-minute break.
Great idea.
Anybody in the room that can cut hair?
I'm way past due on my haircut.
I'll do it. I'll do it. I got you.
I'm not sure about that. Only stick to what you know.
It is.
We'll, I know we're waiting on Sean to come back, but we'll go ahead and get started. Consideration of time.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We'll jump in now to the south end of the island. So we'll leave the north and go to the south, Palmetto Bay Road. There we go. Thank you. Recommendations here are some access management to create the fourth leg of a Sea Pine Circle bypass, as I casually call it, and provide for some pedestrian access. Point by point is first that Greenwood Drive, creating a new Greenwood Drive connection to Palmetto Bay. This would be through some of the Sea Pines property closer to Greenwood, and also through the island center to a cross intersection at Target Road. So we'll talk about it when we get to Sea Pines Circle in a moment. The other three quadrants of Sea Pines Circle have these dedicated roadway bypasses, if you will, that I think help tremendously on the traffic volumes at Sea Pine. This would be finishing off that fourth corner. Secondly, would be to consolidate some driveways and manage access for those left turn motions, as we've talked about in other segments, with the introduction of landscaped medians along Palmetto Bay. Reduce those conflict points and closing up the medians to the extent possible. Still providing for access to the businesses along that stretch. This section looks to be a planted median, 2 11-foot lanes of traffic, buffer, and 12-foot pathways on both sides of Palmetto Bay. So this is a legitimate multimodal street. You can see in this cross section the Audubon Preserve is on the left. Jay Guy, can I ask you for any comments or any further explanation on this? Ed? Access management, reduction of curb cuts.
Brian, I have a
Landscape
question. You're proposing fourth quadrant with a bypass of some sort through the shopping center. That's been proposed on and off for 30 years.
Right.
Is there any dialogue today that suggests that's a doable solution?
Jonathan, there's been dialogue with Sea Pines folks.
That's correct. I met with the neighborhood and with staff collectively all together to talk about that, and then with support for that connection, which we'll get into the details of why that's important and how it works to benefit that community as we get in towards more focused on Sea Pines. But yeah, there seems to be at least preliminary support for that.
And Island Crossing, the private property owner, has that been, have they been contacted relative to?
That's my understanding, yes.
Thank you for that comment. I think Palmetto Bay is one of our most significant opportunities to make a statement about living on Hilton Head Island and coming here and enjoying the place. So I think this is a big one for us.
Just to add one brief thing to this, this is that we've talked a lot about context today, especially as it relates to mobility. As you're coming down off the bridge, this is that transitional zone as you're approaching Sea Pines. And so the design is going to be really important. Setting the tone from a contextual standpoint and aesthetically is going to be important, which I know we're going to detail out, but you really have a wonderful opportunity here with that. And that will affect speeds as well.
I would add a perspective of my constituents, and that is the reduction of speed takes place after the traffic light and goes right by Bay Pines and the dangerous intersections through that area. So to the degree that you can start introducing some speed reduction before the bridge would greatly enhance safety on the downhill side.
Correct.
Those supporting roads of Arrow and Archer and Target as well have an impact on traffic movements. We're suggesting in this diagram that we've got proposed pathway connections along all of those. We're also proposing that there is a roundabout at Target and Arrow that's been talked about before. That's got some tortured geometry and has for a long time. Also an opportunity for an all-way stop at Archer and Arrow Road to slow traffic and allow for there to be crossings. So that's what the yellow dot and the yellow pentagon is all about. This section of Archer, again, requires some roadside drainage work as part of that roadway. As we all know, there's open ditch drainage, but pathways on both sides with a buffer containment within the right-of-way. There may be landscape easements that would be wise to encourage outside of the pathway, but separating the roadway from those pathways. I've experienced a lot of bicyclists on the road because there's no other accommodation there. And we have a trail that is to the north of Arrow Road, but not everybody knows it or uses it because it's more convenient just to ride your bike down the street.
John, is this a town-owned property and is it 60-foot right-of-way at this time?
We own a portion of Arrow Road, not all of Arrow Road. What you see here on this section or profile is to accommodate the treatment within the right-of-way that exists.
Thank
And
you.
are you saying that there's a way that we can keep the bicyclists off of the road in a section like this?
Yeah, to Sean's point, there may be some right-of-way needs, there may be some easement needs, but there is some existing right-of-way there that we could accommodate.
My experience is if somebody's on their bicycle, they're going to get in the road if they can.
Yeah, unless we provide a pathway that is convenient and adjacent to them and encourage them to use it and to properly buffer between the roadway and the pathway. But right now, in many instances, there's no bike accommodations at all. So people don't have much choice but to ride their bike
Well, I
on the street.
understand that.
So, again, we've got businesses along Arrow as well. So there's, I think, a need for access to those businesses outside of the automobile pulling into their parking lots. So that recommendation, that recommendation is to provide for, my machine just went crazy. Install pathways on the south side. This is back to Palmetto Bay, is to provide for that pedestrian and bicycle trail on the south side. We got a mid-block crossing at Newhall at the Audubon Center as well, to remove and to add along to the councilman's point, a median that restricts those movements into Bay Pines Drive as you come down off of the bridge towards Sea Pine Circle to improve safety at that area, eliminate that left turn motion that requires a connector off of Point Comfort Road as well. So all of those home sites have got more direct access to Palmetto Bay.
That would be converting that existing private drive to a public street and making that connection for Bay Pines Drive down to Point Comfort, which is reflected with the black arrow.
That's a high priority for the residents of Bay Pines. Thank you.
So here's a view of what that connection of those two streets would mean and look like with 12-foot drive lanes, and there's some drainage, but the alignments work such that that should be a fairly easy fix. On to Sea Pine Circle, if I may. Jonathan Guy, I'm going to allow you to speak to this while I'm passing the baton. These are the existing 3 of the 4 quadrants that have those bypass conditions that I think serve us well to
Councilman Ames' point that, that northwest connection through the island crossing center has been talked about for some time, but it continues to make a lot of sense.
Does. I'm just looking at traffic right now, and the approach from Greenwood is backed up almost Office Park Road right now. So the importance of why we're stressing this connection is to create circulation around the Sea Pine Circle so that you don't have to go through the circle. That's what you're seeing today. The backups that are on Greenwood is because there are options. Drivers may not know those options, but creating a quadrant network around this allows us to pull traffic off. It allows us to circulate. More importantly, and we'll get into this as we dive into the details, it also gives pedestrians and bicyclists a way to navigate the circle without entering the circle. And that's, roundabouts can be designed in a manner that is conducive for pedestrians, but when you get into the much larger circles like this, it really gets more complicated. They're not as friendly of an environment as they should be, right? So that really helps with that. We looked at a variety of different options here at the intersection, this new connector in Greenwood. We would recommend signalizing this. We looked at a variety of options, as I said, but signalization would work the best here. It's going to give the most opportunity for drivers to understand where they're going and what they're doing as they're coming up Greenwood, exiting the Sea Pines community there. Those drivers that may not be familiar, additional signage could help direct them over, Palmetto. That would get them out of the circle or to Pope Avenue, depending on what they're doing at this location. So it makes a great transitional point for that. And it's key to making this network work long-term from both a pedestrian and a vehicular standpoint as well. We mentioned this earlier, but the putting in a roundabout at Arrow Road and Target Road, it's got some very unique geometry. Roundabouts are fantastic for that. It helps to eliminate additional right-of-way. It makes it more conducive to the volumes that are there in the direction that they're heading. And so that will be important for us to look at and implement. We're kind of stepping through kind of how we see things beginning to lay out and sort of the importance of those, if you will, from an implementation cycle.
Jonathan?
Yes, sir.
Let me go back to the northwest quadrant. Will you figure out, or will the owner of the shopping center figure out his capacity to exit from the property? My impression is today there can be 10 cars trying to get out on Palmetto Bay Road, and we don't have the quadrant connection.
Correct.
I'd be concerned about capacity in that location.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes, sir.
Trying to get my bearings here. So as the new connector reaches Greenwood, you're suggesting that that's signalized. How would that affect, Park Plaza and traffic that is trying to turn left out of Park Plaza into Sea Pines?
Well, what it's going to do is it's going to give us more opportunity to process traffic, and with more mobility, you're going to be able to disperse that traffic in a more efficient manner. And so it would alleviate some of those delays you're seeing today by doing that. So this would help overall. And to your absolutely.
So would the signal be lining up with the Park Plaza entrance there? Okay.
Yep.
All right. Yep. Got it. Thank you.
The only question I've got is I understand that going through the shopping center, that's quite the zigzag. I mean, I've cut through there a number of times, and it's hard to follow. So I can't wrap my head around how that's going to work.
Councilwoman, we've driven through that parking lot a lot, and actually just recently, right after dawn this morning. That entire parking lot, I think, would need to be certainly considered, probably redesigned. There's a lot of angle parking for the major store there. That could be 90-degree parking and maybe free up some geography. But there's a number of dare I say, outbuildings, and it's pretty circuitous to try to navigate that aisle, what's a private drive aisle now. I think there's a call for a public street and reconfiguration of that parking. It's going to be much more efficient.
So just to be clear, this would go behind Staples, is that correct?
This
Way
would
set
be behind Staples.
Yeah.
That's right.
Thank you.
So in addition, sort of the next level is to, as I mentioned earlier, is expanding that pedestrian pathway network, right? You can see up on the screen where we're showing the red connections. These are the movements that we want to prioritize for pedestrians. And as you notice, now you've got 360 degrees circulation around the Sea Pine Circle without ever entering into the Sea Pine Circle. This does a lot of things. It puts pedestrians and bicyclists onto streets that are more conducive for them. The street typical sections can adjust to these and be modified further, but you're moving them to the locations where they are balanced with the vehicles that are going to be there, right? So we're not talking about the heavier volumes like on Palmetto Bay necessarily. And so this gives them the opportunity to strategically move about the roundabout without having to go through and navigate the roundabout. Plus, it's going to help us with individuals who may want to try to cut through the middle of the roundabout because they see a giant section where I can get and there's no vehicles. This will give them the necessary circulation, and we'll add to why we want to do that here in just a second.
I think it kind of really pulls apart that local and the regional trips and really gives you that access. It's needed.
Absolutely, absolutely. So how do we keep them from navigating through or trying to go through the roundabout? Looking at different types of barriers to enhance that. I'm not talking about Jersey barrier necessarily. I'm talking about something that's more aesthetically pleasing than that, but deterring that path. I've said this often, traffic and pedestrians are like water. They always take the path of least resistance. So you have to give them the controls that they need to go to the right places. Not only is this looking from a circulation standpoint for pedestrians, but also looking at the green medians coming from the channelizing islands, extending those back, especially as it relates, going back to the intersection on Palmetto Bay towards Dunnigan's, reducing the conflict points as you approach the intersection. So still keeping driveways, but not allowing for full movement driveways at those locations. Those things are going to help to make the circle work better for the interim time until we can get into something that's a little more efficient for the operations at that location. Working with those property owners, I've mentioned this about to reduce or eliminate access drives near that. Where can we provide for cross connectivity is going to help with that. Still maintaining driveways, but providing cross connectivity. Any trip that can be made outside of the major roadways and connected to those parcels is going to help you with overall efficiencies of the circle. And then signage, helping to understand where you're going, how you're approaching things. Again, remember your driver population. It's individuals who may visit once, twice a year, helping to remind them, utilizing your lane markings and signage. It's going to be very helpful to minimize and reduce lane changes that are occurring as they're approaching to that, because that's what causes a lot of congestion as you're approaching a roundabout like this. And then again, lane channelization to minimize lane changes, right? So helping to streamline their approaches to that, giving them enough advance warning so that they don't get up to the roundabout and make a decision that they need to change things. That will help with that. And I think, in fact, I know some of that's occurring today with individuals having to circulate multiple times to move through this area, which adds to that. And then close out median cuts and add in new medians. Again, landscaping, channelization, that's all going to help with that overall operational efficiency. All that kind of leads up to what is known as what is known as a turbo roundabout. This is something that has been implemented in the United States. It's being done in locations where you need multi-lane roundabouts, but you want to avoid conflicts between weaving movements internal to the roundabout. Okay, so what this does is it channelizes the approach to that. If you're making it left, you're in a particular lane. If you're making a through movement, you're in a particular lane. If you're in a right turning movement, it's a particular lane. So it's almost like you would approach a traffic signal where you would align with the lanes that you're going to. That eliminates the movements that you have to make once you enter into the roundabout. They're channelized, they're protected, so you don't have vehicles crossing over each other. You're all familiar with some of the multi-lane roundabouts that are not only Island, but are in Bluffton, along Bluffton Parkway, and how some of those have to be navigated a certain way. Yes, you get used to that, but they're not as efficient. This has been tested in numerous places and is providing operational efficiency higher than what a traditional two-lane roundabout would be, or multi-lane, I should say. How do you navigate this? I talked about sort of the channelization. You can see just these movements coming out of Greenwood. The red is if you want to go to the left. You essentially go over and then you turn and you move around that. You do have the option if you wanted to go down William Hilton as well. But again, you have another lane that's dedicated for that. So you have the efficiency that you need without the decision-making that you would have under traditional two-lane. And the reason we do this is clearly up there on the screen. Under a normal two-lane roundabout, you can see the conflict points. You've got multiple conflict points anytime there is an approach coming up in the circulating lanes. If you look at just the partial turbo roundabout up there, you can see there's a reduction already of 4 conflict points. And so that's how this really works, is that it takes away some of the decision-making and the confusion that can be there. I get it, it's a lot to process, but this is the direction that we're heading in the United States for our multi-lane roundabouts to get the efficiency. Couple this with the pedestrian improvements that we talked about. Now we're starting to create an intersection that really can efficiently move traffic, but at a speed that's appropriate for this section, right? So we can get greater capacities, but not increase it to a point where it feels like it's an interstate light or a highway type facility from that standpoint.
One more piece to add to that is, I know we've thrown a lot at you here related to sea pines. It's not that all of these improvements need to be made at the same time or need to be made all at once. These are things that can be done over time as, one piece is implemented. You can wait and see how that impacts the circle, right? With the adaptive traffic signal, that'll have an impact on the function of the circle. So I don't want anyone to be concerned that all of these things need to happen at once. It's kind of an overtime progression of improvements.
Are there things that can be done on an interim basis while property acquisition is taking several years? Are there things that can be done relatively quickly?
Absolutely. I think there's things that can be done, and to build on what Tony was saying, all of these they work, they're integral to each other. They build upon each other. So almost as we walked through this, a lot of the things that are done can be done in that sequence, or can be done somewhat out of sequence as you lead up to the larger improvements at the roundabout in and of itself. But there are things that can be done immediately. You can address the signage and pavement markings. You can look at consolidation of driveways. You can look at channelization. You can extend the medians and put those in. And those are small things that don't require right-of-way. They do require encroachment with SCDOT and coordination with them, but they're relatively small improvements. And you may actually get partnership, especially on the signage, that SCDOT would foot the bill for that. So there's things like that that can be done pretty quickly to help.
Thank you.
David? Go ahead.
I presume the advantage of this is safety, but is it also increasing capacity, or is it allowing cars to pass through the circle more quickly?
It's all 3 of those things. So it does increase safety because we reduce the points of conflict, as I enumerated. We're seeing capacity increases when you implement one of these anywhere between, I'll just say an average of about 35% more capacity, right? So it gives longer longevity. The great thing that you've got here is that you already have a very large circle. So you can actually build this within the circle if you wanted to help with that circulation. It does help with moving traffic through. So if you're coming out of Greenwood and you want to go up William Hilton, it gives you that ability. But you also have, with the parallel network or the quadrant network, you've got that ability to circulate around that as well. And as I look at things, that's the beauty behind a roundabout, is that it takes a right turn, or takes a left turn and makes it a right turn, right? Same thing happens with the quadrant network. I can still go through by just turning right at 2 locations at the signals. And so that's going to give you efficiency as well.
Where would we be able to experience one of these?
There's one about 2 hours south of here in Jacksonville, Florida.
Okay. this gives me heartache.
I'm sure.
I mean,
I'm sure it's a
just
lot.
Takes me back to the days when we had 2 lanes on the circle that just was disastrous. And the turbo aspect is very interesting, and how it might function, but I could see people getting extremely confused, because we know that when some of our guests show up here, they forget how to drive, and this is just gonna throw them for a loop. One thing else I'll say is, as we get into the future of designing the bike paths around this, make certain that it's so far away from the roads that people don't mistake it as a road. We've seen that quite often as well. Yes, Alex.
The turbo concept, did you say that there would be some sort of treatment in between the lanes of traffic?
Absolutely. If you could back up one on that, you can see there's lines up. There are medians that separate the lanes, right? And that's done so that you don't have weaving. It's done so that you don't have the confusion that you would have under a normal 2-lane roundabout of what lane do I need to be in? How do I go there? And that takes away some of the, and I truly get your comment, Mayor, relative to multi-lane roundabouts. From a driver's perspective, they can be very intimidating. And that was really the intent behind this design, was to remove the intimidation so that it gives you the operational efficiency that you're looking for and gives you the safety, but makes it in a manner that drivers feel comfortable doing it because they are in the lane they're supposed to be.
And that's the follow-up question to that is, as I can appreciate the proposed turbo fitting in the footprint of the current circle, but I guess I'm having a hard time wrapping my head around the feeder into that, particularly coming off of Greenwood, because it is so tight. I mean, you're offering, I guess, a 3-lane choice coming into the circle. Other than that, I'm curious to know how that would work.
Yeah. So the difference here is that what we're going to do with this when we conceptually laid this out is we actually contract the circle from where it is. So as you pull that circle in, that gives you more operational space for the multiple lanes as you approach that, right? So where the circulation is occurring, you're actually going to bring that in. It's going to open that throat up a little bit more. Would there need to be some easements and some working with that? Probably so, just because construction, you always have to push those limits just a little bit. But this would fit in there and would work from that standpoint.
Would the proposal you have for Greenwood apply to any of the other?
As far as relative to improved
The
signal.
entrance that you're,
Oh, yeah, it would be uniform around each of the approaches to this, right? So you're gonna standardize that, the approaches into the roundabout from that standpoint. They would be very similar, if not identical.
Us a link to that Jacksonville example, please.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Ask for that and maybe send it in the slow-mo or a version where we can slow-mo it so we can follow the
Road
traffic.
trip.
Yeah, I'm with the mayor. I think I need Tom's looking at this.
I know it's a lot.
And the other thing is it appears as though there's a nice circle there, a nice landscape circle. So this would reduce the size of that landscape circle inside of it, if you will.
Correct. But you'd still have the opportunity for landscaping inside there. It still would be very
Right.
generous. It's
Right.
just, it gives us that opportunity
But a lot
to.
smaller. Yeah.
Yeah, it's oversized for what a traditional roundabout would be today.
The other question is, during that kind of construction, if that happens in the future, then you're going to be relying upon the quadrant to get around, in and out.
That's actually a very astute point. It gives you the opportunity from a maintenance of traffic to balance as you're building this, to do that. Would you restrict the movements at the roundabout? Not necessarily 100%, but you may strain those down as you're building at certain times of the day. But the quadrant network would allow you to circulate as you need to if you were to build that, it gives you that option.
During construction, you can do it.
During construction, absolutely.
Oh, yeehaw, I'm going to need 2 bottles of Tums.
I think the quadrant idea is really impactful for doing a lot of things and can really, leverage those parallel connections, which are desperately needed on the island, to really pull out those local trips and really take another look at this circle and see, is that what's needed once you begin to pull these local trips and the access off of this circle is doing everything for everybody right now, and how do we begin to kind of loosen that around that circle? So, you know,
Go back to David's question earlier, which is it feasible to have that pathway going through the shopping center?
I think so. I think so.
I think it gives you, to Addie's point, it brings resiliency to your network, which is something that you don't have a lot
It's a
of
good
places.
idea, but
I think it's
you
feasible.
have to acquire that property.
Sure.
I think you're going to have to redesign, think about how that gets redesigned to accommodate those users. But I think, you know, a lot of folks using the pathway system are probably accessing some of those businesses. Providing that access through there, providing that accommodation for that mode is something to really.
I can see it being a lifesaver on a Friday, Saturday, Sunday. You've got guests coming in, stopping at the grocery store there, taking the back road, avoiding the circle. So it allows for traffic to flow down Pope Avenue easier than it would be without it. So I think, you know, not speaking for Sea Pines by any means, but it would allow their guests easier access into Sea Pines.
I think it'd be helpful, because there's kind of a squiggly sketch here. It blow up of what that would look like. Because until the mayor said it goes behind Staples, I assume it would be going in front of Staples, like the pathway through there goes now. Something that looks like this is what it would look like if property acquisition and agreement.
Absolutely. Good. Move on. Okay. Pope Avenue and Cligney Circle. Taking a serious look at Cordillo to the Circle being the most congestion, maybe the most problematic, quite frankly. The segment from Cordillo moving to the west up to Sea Pine Circle is, I think, one of our most beautiful corridors because of the widened median in that eastbound, in that southbound direction. There's a little bit more of movement to the roadway. It's very attractive. Again, large plants overhanging the road. It's once you get to this east side of Cordillo, when lots of curb cuts, a lot of conflict points, but we've got some real recommendations as to how we make this into something more civilized. Just as we talked about the mid-island segment of the parkway, this too, I think, is a whole different character to what we're used to seeing on the island. This is highly populated, high activity, lots of retailers, a lot of food and bev, beach parking, beach access. So it is more of an urban condition than it is a parkway condition that we have elsewhere, my philosophical standpoint. So first off, widening and providing on both sides of the street a 16-foot wide path. I'll let Addie speak to that. It's for automobile. It's for bicyclists and pedestrians separated from the automobiles. We've got a section of that, and Addie can speak to that in a second. Secondly, at the two major signalized intersection at Lagoon on the right and Cordillo on the left, of those remaining signalized, but with a raised pedestrian table. So the vehicular way raises to the sidewalk, dare I say, elevation, to intentionally tell the motorists, not like a speed bump through a retail center, but it tells the motorist, this is a place to slow down. This is pedestrian and bike intensive. It doesn't affect that traffic movement from an automobile standpoint. By this 25-mile-an-hour speed zone through here as well. Folks should be going at a slower and civilized pace.
So Brian, if I'm driving 25 miles an hour and I hit this table, do I feel it in the car? Does it jolt me?
No, it doesn't jolt you like and we've built these before. It doesn't jolt you like a intentional jolt of a speed bump. It's more relaxed entrance and exiting slopes, but when you're on that table, you distinctly feel that you came through a vertical motion and down.
And if I'm doing 60?
I would hope that it would, I hope that it would
Careful, they
not
don't have to.
necessarily cause harm, but certainly some damage. So third is to provide a mid-block crossing with all pedestrian and bicycle crossing with all the accoutrements at Nassau, which is just, yep, will do. And also take advantage of Caligny Circle with a passageway from the intersection of the circle to the entrance into the beach plaza for more direct access, another way of accessing the beach parking for beachgoers, not just from the parking lot, but also from Caligny Plaza. So there's the reduction of median cuts and more right in, right out. Taken all together, this is, again, more of a urban street, and it accommodates all modes of travel. You can see the outboard 16-foot wide pathways. There's an amenity zone. We've provided for on-street parking adjacent to Low Country Celebration. In perspective, again, Low Country is on the left. The beach is behind this viewer. Provide for safe crossings at the curb cuts that remain and are needed. Enhance the plantings in the median and propose expansion of it. Install an amenity zone next to what would be on-street parking. A 16-foot wide pathway system on either side. But that is a view looking, hovering over Lagoon Road intersection, looking towards Sea Pine Circle.
What is an amenity zone?
Benches, trash receptacles, separation from moving vehicles, i.e. bicycles and parked automobiles. Somebody opens the door, they're not taking out a bicycle or pedestrian.
Thank you.
But it's all the stuff we need to provide for. Light fixtures, signs, trash receptacles, all the stuff that's on the street.
Yeah. Brian, I'm somewhat having a hard time with the walkway that's coming through the circle. I'm assuming that would mean that we would have to have stoppage in the circle for the pedestrians to cross. And
That's right.
Caligny area being somewhat of a cul-de-sac. I see it similar to the quadrant conversation we were having at Sea Pine Circle, where there's not a lot of alternatives to enhance the movements that have to happen at the circle. I'm just curious how that works with, and there's a stacking problem as it is.
Well, there's crossings from one side of Pope to the other, from beach parking to Caligny Plaza presently in that area. The notion is that this gives, that we already have crossings of North and South Forest Beach, one of which is a hawk crossing. Relatively speaking, and Jay Guy can speak to this, our traffic volumes around this circle are fairly modest. We've got obviously a lot of beach travelers and a lot of folks that are coming from the beach and going to Caligny Plaza to the food and bev. This is just another way of taking advantage, quite frankly, of what is a beautiful circle without destroying that beautiful circle and giving another means of accessing the beach in the parking lots that are adjacent. So it would be another, as per the systems, it would be another intentional crossing of the circle meant to not only provide for pedestrians, but to slow traffic down as well.
So back in the day, there used to be parking within that circle, and it was removed. And as you mentioned before, a path of least resistance. I don't see people cutting through there anymore trying to get to the beach because they want to go to the safer Hawk Signal or further down on North Forest Beach. So I might agree with you on that, Alex, yeah.
I agree as well, and yeah, it's okay to cross there at Pope Avenue, but when you get to the drop-off at Caligny, that's a bad crossing area. You can, in fact, I think that worsens safety in that area.
I'm cool on the idea as well.
Can we back up to Lagoon? That crossing has bothered me ever since it was constructed. There's no safe pedestrian refuge going across there. It needs to be an all-stop with no right turns in my view. And I've been begging for something to happen differently about that. It's a horrible crossing for pedestrians and bicyclists, and we have a lot of folks crossing there.
One?
Yeah, Lagoon, right there across from Low Country Celebration parking area. So when you have folks emptying out of the parking, the beach parking and Low Country Celebration parking, they're turning left while the signal is telling pedestrians and bicyclists to cross there. And you've got right turns coming off of Lagoon at the same time. So it's you may as well don't cross there.
There's opportunities there to explore doing pedestrian scrambles there. And I think having that raised crossing really helps kind of elevate. And this is a space, as Brian said earlier, it's more urban, if you will. And the priority needs to be to the person on the bike or the pedestrian. And I think creating a scramble, specifically as we've like narrowed down the cross section a little bit, that is something that really gives the priority. And you feel whichever way you want. And the second is the vehicle. So I think that is an option to explore and what are down the way. But I think that would be a great opportunity for that.
Yeah, Mayor, I think this is where we need something right away. I get on my knees and beg if I could. I would do it right now if that would help.
So if I'm not mistaken, and Mark, please correct me, but that intersection has already been identified by DOT as a problem. And I think there's some conversations that are taking place on that. So look for something there.
Rather than beg.
Brian, sure. Thought comes to my mind that this section of the road almost gets to the point where the pedestrian has the right of way, if you understand what I'm saying.
It's really helping that Nassau crossing, because people do that all the time. They're at Low Country Celebration Park and want to go get something to eat. Cross right there. It's another nightmare.
And there will be a combination of efforts here, right? The adaptive traffic signal, this is a location where that's going, whereas the bike and ped detection, potentially the raised tables here, the changing character that's being proposed. If we go to this last slide, Brian, will help with some of that. This has some more traffic calming, more of a complete street opportunity here. It does make wider pathway sections here to accommodate more users. And the crossings that are proposed are to try to reduce the volume at that one location that currently exists. So I think there's some benefits that we'll see from application of these items.
John, if you could, since it's been mentioned several times, just provide a quick update on the traffic lights integration.
Yes, sir. I've finalized the installation of the infrastructure. The last 2 weeks of July are when they'll be turning the system on and off to test. And the system should go completely live here in early to mid-August. That turning it on and off allows us to calibrate and to understand the operational conditions that exist. We anticipate that everything will be operational by mid to late August.
Okay, great. I think this is absolutely phenomenal, and we've had 3 hours. We're going to get to public comment in a minute, but it's what a great presentation and a lot of information for us to digest. One thing that I'm going to throw out to you to consider, futuristic to consider, is the time that when lights change, the time from a green to a red or a red to a green, that it be extended, because we've got a tremendous problem with people not stopping for red lights or yellow lights. I know that there's a baseline within the state, but if we can look at that and try to understand that from y'all's perspective of increasing that delay time. So, when maybe it's, 2 lights that are red and half a second or a second later it turns green. Just to prevent these running red lights because it's become a real issue. Any other comments from council?
Or just quickly that Pope Avenue, Coligny Circle area, in my written comments to the staff, I mentioned that when you go on around the circle and go South Forest Beach, where it leaves and becomes double lanes, particularly at the alley, and that pedestrian crossing is dangerous, and I think we need to add something about that. And then also going the other direction from North Forest Beach to Avocet. Those crossing areas really need to be a part of this focus right now.
Pedestrians crossing one lane of traffic.
And that's where, I used to live in the South Forest Beach area and go right across at the alley in there. And, I'd grab all the little kids I could and hold them as best I could. But it's enough said.
That's why we're looking at both of those sections of North and South Forest Beach to deal with those pedestrian and bike issues.
Okay, any other comments? Okay, we'll move on to appearance by citizens. I'd like to remind our citizens that section 2-5-70 of the town's code limits each person to 3 minutes when addressing town council. At the end of the 3 minutes, you're asked to conclude your comments. Please maintain a decorum suitable for the meeting and refrain from using profane and abusive language. If you have any materials you'd like to give to town council, please give them to the town clerk after you're finished speaking. Kimberly, do we have anybody signed up to
We
speak?
have two.
Okay,
Skip Hoagland.
Hoagland?
Skip Hoagland, Windmill Harbor. What saddens me for all residents and taxpayers is we have elected, hired, kick-the-can officials who have allowed themselves to be controlled by the special interest groups, the GIC, Greater Island Council, and the Chamber. And worse, have allowed these secret private groups to control, make them free members quid pro quo, serving in these basically secret underground government organizations, which is a tremendous conflict. All these special interest groups care about who is made up of builders, developers, real estate investors, chamber tourism interests, is profit and stuffing and cramming as many people as possible onto this fragile island and ecosystem for their greed and their profits. To heck with the residents in our environment. I have lived here for 47 years, like many, for the Charles Fraser vision. None of us signed up for this type of dishonest and dysfunctional local government. Honest public service is appreciated, and a part-time weak mayor does not work. To add, folks, how many cars can fit on one road from Hilton Head to I-95, and where will we be in 10 years? With the uncontrollable growth in Bluffton and Hardyville, this is not just a Hilton Head problem. We have no master land plans to guide us into perpetuity. 6 pounds in a 5-pound bag does not work. I think improvements to our local infrastructure, bike paths, et cetera, makes good, perfect sense for residents and existing tourism. The bridge is nothing but a stent for your heart and a waste of $350 million. Just replace the outdated, potentially dangerous bridges that we have. Again, with no master land plans in the entire Beaufort County has turned us into just another Joni Mitchell song. They paved paradise, you don't know what you got until it's gone. 3 million tourists adversely affecting traffic and 45 million locals who have moved here for a peaceful, safe, clean environment must be addressed in these studies. It's become a very serious problem. We have all allowed this slow-growing cancer to grow again, caused by kick-the-can-down officials in favor of special interests, no master land plans. Now we have to figure out how to stop and remove it before it kills us. Trying to be another Savannah, Charleston, and Myrtle Beach is ludicrous. Thanks for your time, and I'm very sorry for all of us in this situation. I blame our last town manager, Steve Riley, and his chamber lawyers and the GIC. Lastly, where does all this money come from? Just more tens of millions paid by taxpayers, more increased taxes. We need a full-time Charles Fraser CEO type mayor with a vision and pay him $500,000 to clean up this mess, not a mayor who commits financial fraud. You need to be removed from office, Mr. Perry.
Kimberly, do we have anybody else signed up?
Frank Babel.
First of all, I'd like to say, I'm here about safety. And I think you guys did a wonderful job. Staff and the people who were involved in this study. You delivered the beef. You know, as they say, where's the beef, Em? You delivered the beef. We've got some things to do, but you did a great job. So just a little background. Back in the day, when we started this journey, the way we addressed safety was Steve, Alfred, myself, and Darren Shoemaker went out and we went to the places that people were getting hit. And we looked at them and said, well, we got to change some things. And so mitigations were made, changes were made, and we kept the crash rate down. And we did this, and it was an incremental approach. But after a while, we realized that Shelter Cove, we had a problem getting people across the street. And so a corridors approach was taken, and you know the results. It really worked, and it's just a great success. Pope Ave also was changed, and that was a great success. So the corridors approach for you council folks, this is the way to go. We don't want to go back to Steve, Darren and myself going out to corners. We want to make sure that the corridor approach is the way we handle this situation. But we think there's some other elements you need to think about. These include the need to reduce speed, provide enforcement, and encourage courtesy. Speeding and safety are two different things. They don't come together all the time. They are in conflict. You've got to make decisions about what's important, speeding or safety, okay? And studies show that you can basically speed up or slow down and get more traffic through. And I'll hand out something after this is over. And I think there's some roadways around here where people are just driving too fast and the speed limit should be reduced. Enforcements, we shouldn't have blue lights everywhere, but we've got a couple of problems. We have too many people that are running red lights now. We have too many people who are going through red lights, and they're going to hit people. So I'd recommend, and I recommend it to Bob, put some sheriffs out there to look at this. Give these people tickets. It's really dangerous. Do it in high visibility areas, okay? Make a point out of it. And last, this is a safety project. It isn't just about needed infrastructure. It's about attitude and courtesy. It's about public education on vehicle, bike, and pedestrian etiquette and our laws. It's about creating a culture of respect for our roads, pathways, and beaches. It's about evaluating how all this is working out and then sharing it with Beaufort County and the POA so they can also implement it. So, continued improvement is better than delayed perfection, folks, okay?
Thank you.
Thank you.
So
And
can
good
we,
luck.
Jocelyn, she did ask me if she could speak earlier, and yes.
Hi, Jocelyn Steiger, Government Affairs Director for the
You can pull
Hilton
that
Head
down.
Area Realtors. I am standing up. I had just mentioned during the break that I'm very concerned about the entrance for Dreesen Beach, Bradley Beach Road. Hundreds and hundreds of people park at the end of that road in that parking lot. They go up and down that road every day. It's a highly traveled road. And to turn left off of William Hilton Parkway, there's just a very tiny left turn lane that holds 2 cars. So it's a very dangerous place. You almost get rear-ended trying to turn left. And I'm concerned that everybody's focused on the Berks Beach intersection and they're going to forget what's happening at Bradley Beach Road. The other comment I wanted to make is possibly when you're thinking about cyclists, my husband is an avid cyclist. You're coming off the Cross Island Parkway, you're hitting 30 miles per hour probably on your bike. You can't be on the bike path. Maybe we should think about a bike lane. It's dangerous for someone to bike on our bike paths at that rate of speed. And they're coming down and they do it and they use it a lot and that just worries me. But thank you very much.
Thank you. Yes, Alex.
Yeah, first of all, thank Brian and team. Well done. Thank you, Sean, and your team. The one piece of the systems that we have not spent a whole lot of time on is the transit. And curious to know, are we going to have the same type of exercise where we sit around the table and talk about that. It seems to not get the interest that the cars and bikes and peds get. So I know it's something that we've talked about in the past. I think it's something that we're definitely lacking. Curious to know when we're going to have that conversation around it.
We will. Not sure when, but we will. It's on the radar. Any other discussion? Seeing none, is there a motion to adjourn? So moved. Thank you all.